before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. My name is Larry Ward and I'm 36 years old. This happened in the Dudes Wilderness, West Virginia, during what was supposed to be a peaceful week of camping. I had no idea how quickly my retreat into solitude would turn into something out of a nightmare, one I'm still not entirely sure I escaped. I've been camping for years, usually alone. It started as a way to clear my head after I left firefighting, but it quickly became my way of life. Out here, there's no noise, no reminders of my failures, no people to disappoint, just me, my RV, and the wild. I'd read about dolly sods online, rugged trails, beautiful overlooks, the kind of place where you could truly feel off the grid. That's exactly what I wanted. I parked my RV near a trailhead that wasn't even marked on the maps. The road had been rough, full of potholes and overgrown branches, but I liked that. The harder it was to get there, the fewer people I'd run into. The first couple of days were uneventful. I hiked, gathered firewood, and took in the scenery. The wilderness was hauntingly beautiful, mist rolling through the trees in the mornings, the sunlight casting golden patterns on the forest floor. But on the third day, things started to shift. I was out for a hike when I heard it for the first time, a faint, high-pitched whistle. At first, I thought it might be a bird, but it wasn't rhythmic, and it didn't seem to come from any particular direction. It would start, then stop abruptly, as if someone or something was toying with me. I tried to ignore it, but the sound followed me all the way back to camp. That night, as I sat by the fire, I heard it again, a long, mournful whistle that seemed closer this time. I shined my flashlight into the woods, but there was nothing there. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I told myself it was just the wind. The next morning, I decided to venture deeper into the forest. I marked my path carefully, broken branches, small piles of stones, so I wouldn't get lost. The weather was strange, with the sky shifting between sunny and overcast, but that wasn't unusual in the mountains. About an hour in, I came across something odd. Carvings on a tree. They were fresh, not the kind of marks that years of growth would stretch and fade. There were symbols, circles, arrows, and stick figures with hollow, featureless faces. I touched the bark, half expecting it to feel hot or cold, but it was just wood. Still, it sent a shiver through me. I kept going, but the forest seemed wrong. The trees were denser here, their branches twisting unnaturally. The ground was covered in moss that felt too soft, like stepping on sponge. The whistle came again, faint but persistent. It almost sounded like it was calling my name. By the time I turned back, I realized the trail markings I'd made were gone. The broken branches were whole, the piles of stones scattered. I took out my compass, but the needle spun aimlessly. My GPS wouldn't connect either. Panic started to creep in. I'd never been lost like this before. I forced myself to stay calm and retrace my steps as best as I could. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing, and that's when I saw it, the hollow tree. It was massive, its bark blackened and split in places as if it had been struck by lightning. A large opening at its base gaped like a mouth. Around it were more carvings, some etched into the stones that surrounded the tree like sentinels. The air here was different, heavy, charged, as if a storm was about to break. I heard the whistle again, but this time it was followed by a voice. Kevin. I froze. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years, but I recognized it instantly. Charlie, my partner from my firefighting days, the man I'd failed to save. No, I whispered, backing away. This wasn't possible. Charlie was dead. I saw him die. But the voice came again, softer this time, tinged with pain. Kevin, why did you leave me? My head swam. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The whistle grew louder, and the shadows around the tree seemed to deepen, pooling like ink. Something stepped out from the hollow, tall, thin, with impossibly long limbs and a face that wasn't a face. Its eyes were hollow pits, its mouth an empty void. It didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. Its presence was suffocating. My chest tightened, and I felt like I was drowning. The voice continued, but now it wasn't just Charlie. It was my father, my sister, people I hadn't thought about in years, all of them accusing me, asking why I hadn't done more. The figure raised a hand, and the shadows around it shifted, forming shapes, people, but wrong. Their faces were blank, their bodies twisted. They reached for me, their hollow eyes accusing. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in gasps. "Stay away!" I shouted, though my voice sounded small and weak. The entity didn't stop. It stepped closer, and with each step, the memories it projected became sharper, more vivid. The fire that killed Charlie, my father's disappointed face when I quit firefighting, the friends I'd pushed away. It was all too much. I don't know how I made it back to the RV. My legs moved on autopilot, carrying me through the forest as the whistle followed, growing fainter but never disappearing. When I finally reached the clearing where the RV was parked, I collapsed against the side, gasping for air. I locked the doors and sat in the driver's seat, my hands shaking. I tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. I checked my watch, but the hands weren't moving. Everything felt wrong, as if time itself had stopped. That night, the entity came again. I didn't see it, but I felt its presence, heavy and cold, pressing against the walls of the RV. Shadows moved outside the windows, and the whistle pierced the silence. I tried to block it out, covering my ears, but the voices came anyway, whispering inside my head. "You can't run, Kevin." The next day, I found a journal tucked into the bushes near the RV. It was old, the pages yellowed and brittle, but the writing was clear. It belonged to someone named Daniel, a camper who had been here years ago. His entries started normal enough, descriptions of hikes, wildlife, the beauty of the wilderness. But as I flipped through, the tone changed. He wrote about the whistle, the carvings, the hollow tree. The last entry sent a chill down my spine. "It wants what you regret most. It feeds on it. If you don't give it what it wants, it will take everything." I knew what I had to do. I didn't have a plan, just a desperate idea. I gathered a metal pole, some rope, and a fire starter from the RV. The storm clouds were rolling in, and I hoped I could use the lightning to destroy whatever was tied to the tree. When I returned to the hollow tree, the entity was waiting for me. Its hollow eyes bore into mine, and the shadows writhed around it like living things. The whistle was deafening now, and the voices screamed in my head. I tied the metal pole to one of the stones near the tree, angling it toward the sky. My hands shook as I worked, but I couldn't stop. The entity didn't try to stop me. It just stood there, watching, as if amused by my efforts. When the storm broke, I stood in the clearing, holding my breath. Lightning streaked across the sky, and I prayed it would hit the pole. For a moment, nothing happened, and I thought I'd failed. Then the bolt came. It struck the pole, and the energy surged into the ground, splitting the hollow tree with a deafening crack. The entity let out a scream, high-pitched, inhuman, filled with rage and pain. The shadows dissolved, and the wind whistle stopped. I stumbled back to the RV, my body trembling, my mind reeling. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, and for the first time in days, the forest felt normal, quiet, still. The engine started on the first try, and I drove away without looking back. I don't know if I destroyed the Hollow Watcher or if I just escaped its grasp, but I do know one thing. I'll never go back to Dolly Sods, and I'll never camp alone again. Some places aren't meant to be explored, no matter how beautiful they seem. I'm Richard Jones, and back in 2023, I decided to take my RV up to the remote stretches of the Porcupine Mountains in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. As a graphic designer more acquainted with pixels than pine trees, I thought a solo trip might spark some creativity, or at least give me a funny story to tell at the next office party. I packed more gadgets than gear, thinking my tablet and a portable Wi-Fi hotspot would be enough to keep me connected. My buddies laughed, saying I'd be back within a day begging for a decent latte, but I was determined to prove them wrong. After all, how hard could camping be when your bed has wheels and there's a mini fridge stocked with craft beer? The drive was uneventful, save for the occasional deer darting across the winding roads. The autumn leaves painted the landscape in fiery hues, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of optimism. Maybe this nature thing wasn't so bad after all. I pulled into an isolated campground, the kind where you have to fill out a slip and drop it into a box because there's no ranger station. As I set up, a beat-up pickup truck rattled past, its driver giving me a long, scrutinizing stare. He was an older man with a weathered face, sporting a beard that could house a family of sparrows. I gave a friendly wave, but he just spat out the window and drove on. Well, nice to meet you too, I muttered, shaking my head. Night fell quicker than I expected. I settled into my RV, flicking on the interior lights and firing up a movie on my tablet. Halfway through, the Wi-Fi cut out. Figures. I decided to step outside to get some fresh air. The silence was thick, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoots of owls. Taking a deep breath, I savored the crisp air when I noticed a faint glow deeper in the woods. Curiosity piqued, I grabbed my flashlight. This is how horror movies start, I joked to myself, but ventured forth anyway. As I approached, the glow sharpened into the flicker of a campfire. There, in a small clearing, stood a group of people in a circle, their faces obscured by hooded cloaks. Great, I've stumbled upon a cult meeting. Just my luck, I thought. I was about to back away slowly when one of them turned abruptly, revealing a pale face with sharp features. His eyes locked onto mine, and a sly grin spread across his lips. Well, looks like we have an unexpected guest, he called out. The others turned in unison, their gazes piercing through the darkness. Sorry to intrude, I stammered. I was just, enjoying a walk and saw your fire. Join us, he said, motioning with a gloved hand. We were just getting started. Every rational part of me screamed to leave, but politeness overrode common sense. Sure, why not? I said, walking into the clearing. The warmth of the fire did little to ease the chill crawling up my spine. Up close, their cloaks appeared tattered, and a strange symbol was stitched onto the fabric, a triangle entwined with a serpent. We're celebrating the harvest, another member said, her voice smooth like honey but with an unsettling undertone. Cool. I didn't bring any snacks, though, I quipped, hoping humor might lighten the mood. No matter, the leader replied. We have plenty to share. They began chanting in a language I didn't recognize. The flames danced higher, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. I glanced around, noticing that there were no tents or supplies, just the fire and the people. Well, this has been fun, but I should probably head back, I said, taking a step backward. The leader insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. The ritual is incomplete without a proper offering. Offering? I laughed nervously. I think I'll pass on that. Before I could turn, two members grabbed my arms with a grip stronger than their slender frames suggested. Panic surged through me. Hey, let go! The leader approached, pulling back his hood to reveal a bald head etched with scars forming the same symbol on their cloaks. You stumbled upon us for a reason. The woods guide those who are meant to join. I struggled, but their hold tightened. Look, I'm just a guy who got lost. I didn't see anything. Precisely, he smiled. You're nobody, a perfect vessel. They dragged me toward a makeshift altar, a flat stone slab stained dark. My heart pounded as adrenaline kicked in. In a burst of desperation, I stomped hard on the foot of the person to my right. He yelped, loosening his grip just enough for me to wrench free. Without thinking, I bolted into the woods. Branches whipped against my face as I ran blindly, the chants morphing into shouts behind me. My lungs burned, but fear propelled me forward. I could hear footsteps gaining, leaves crunching under heavy boots. Help! I screamed into the void, knowing full well that I was miles from anyone who could hear. Suddenly, a blinding light flooded the area. Freeze! State police! A voice boomed. The leader recoiled as officers emerged from all sides, weapons drawn. Stunned, I watched as they apprehended the cult members one by one. An officer helped me to my feet. Are you okay? I think so, I gasped. How did you find me? We've been tracking this group for months, he explained. Got a tip they were operating in this area. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A scream pierced the night, a guttural, inhuman wail that didn't seem possible from a human throat. What was that? I whispered. The officer's face paled. Stay here. He moved toward the sound, hand hovering over his holster. Against better judgment, I followed at a distance. The officers converged on a clearing where they found a grisly scene. A shallow pit filled with bones, some animal, others unmistakably human. The remains were arranged in grotesque patterns, and the stench was overwhelming. One of the officers retched. Looks like we found their dumping ground, another muttered grimly. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just some harmless group of oddballs. They were killers. Maybe worse. The night stretched on as statements were taken and evidence collected. Eventually, they escorted me back to my RV. We'll have someone keep an eye on you tonight, the officer assured me. But you should be safe now. Safe, right? I nodded absently, still processing the night's events. Inside the RV, I locked every door and window, then double-checked them for good measure. Exhaustion hit me like a freight train, but sleep was a distant possibility. I sat at the small kitchenette table, nursing a cold beer, the kind of liquid courage that does nothing after the fact. Morning light seeped through the blinds, and with it came a knock on the door. I flinched, but relaxed when I saw it was the officer from the night before. "Mind if we talk?" he asked. "Sure." I opened the door, and he stepped in, removing his hat. "We've identified the group's leader, named Silas Crowley," he said, flipping open a notebook. "Former anthropology professor who went off the grid after some controversial research." Controversial how? Obsession with ancient rituals, human sacrifices, the works. He attracted a following of like-minded individuals. We've been trying to pin him down for a while. A chill ran through me. So I just stumbled into a homicidal maniac's backyard? Pretty much, he sighed. You're lucky to be alive. Others weren't so fortunate. I swallowed hard, the reality settling in. What happens now? Silas and his group are in custody. With your testimony, we can ensure they won't see the light of day for a long time. Glad to hear it, I replied, meaning it. He gave a small nod. If you remember anything else, give me a call. He handed me his card. After he left, I started packing up. The allure of the wilderness had lost its shine. As I secured the last of my gear, I noticed something tucked under the windshield wiper, a small, folded piece of parchment. Heart pounding, I unfolded it to reveal a hand-drawn symbol, a triangle entwined with a serpent. Below it, scrawled in elegant script, were the words, "This isn't over." I scanned the tree line but saw nothing. Not willing to stick around to find out, I jumped into the driver's seat and fired up the engine. The RV roared to life, and I peeled out of the campsite faster than any posted speed limit would approve. The drive back was a blur. Every so often I checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that beat-up pickup or a convoy of cloaked figures tailing me. But the road remained empty, save for the occasional semi-truck. Back in Chicago, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. I threw myself into work using design projects as a distraction, but curiosity gnawed at me. Who exactly was Silas Crowley, and how had he managed to evade capture for so long? One night, unable to sleep, I dove into the depths of the internet. Articles, forum posts, and obscure websites painted a disturbing picture. Silas had been linked to mysterious disappearances across several states, always near remote areas. His followers were zealots, believing in some twisted form of immortality achieved through rituals involving unwitting participants. I came across a photo from an old university yearbook. There he was, clean-shaven, eyes sharp but not yet clouded by madness. A far cry from the scarred visage that haunted my memories. Beneath the photo was a list of his published works. One title stood out, Transcendence Through Sacrifice, an Anthropological Perspective. I clicked on a link leading to an abstract. It detailed ancient practices meant to bridge the gap between the mortal and the divine, often requiring a human conduit. Chillingly, it argued that such rituals were not acts of barbarism, but profound spiritual endeavors. A notification popped up, a new email. Odd, considering the hour. The subject line read, "We will meet again." I hesitated before opening it. The message contained only a single image, the same symbol of the triangle and serpent. My stomach twisted. How did they find me? My mind raced. I hadn't given anyone my contact information, and the police assured me that all members were accounted for. Except perhaps they weren't. Determined not to be a sitting duck, I reached out to the officer who had helped me, Detective Marcus Lee. His number went straight to voicemail. I left a message explaining the email and urged him to call me back. Days passed with no response. Then a news report caught my attention. Detective Marcus Lee had been found dead in his home, the victim of an apparent suicide. But the details didn't add up. No note, no history of depression, just a decorated officer who suddenly took his own life. I knew better. Feeling cornered, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't about to let these people control my life. If they wanted a game of cat and mouse, I'd show them I wasn't easy prey. I revisited the forums, digging deeper into the network of connections surrounding Silas. A pattern emerged. The locations of past rituals formed a rough circle on the map, with Chicago unsettlingly close to the center. Late one night, my apartment buzzer sounded. Cautiously, I approached the intercom. "Who is it?" No response, just static. Then a voice whispered, "Time to complete the ritual, Richard." Panic surged, but I steeled myself. "Funny, I was just thinking the same thing," I muttered. I hung up and grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the door. A relic from my high school days, more for nostalgia than anything else, but solid wood nonetheless. The hallway was quiet as I stepped out, scanning for any movement. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open to reveal a cloaked figure. Without waiting, I charged, swinging the bat with every ounce of fear and rage pent up inside me. The figure dodged, but not fast enough. The bat connected with a sickening thud, and he crumpled to the ground. I pulled back the hood to reveal a young man, eyes wide with shock. He wasn't Silas, but he wore the same symbol around his neck. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell. More were coming. I dashed back into my apartment, locking the door and wedging a chair under the handle. My mind raced. They weren't going to stop unless I stopped them. That's when an idea struck me. Rushing to my computer, I accessed the security system controls for the building, a perk of designing the software for the management company. I activated the fire alarm, triggering an automatic call to the fire department and unlocking all exit doors. Within minutes, the halls filled with blaring sirens and the stomping of residents evacuating. The cult members would be lost in the chaos, their anonymity stripped away. I joined the crowd heading downstairs, blending in. Outside, fire trucks arrived and firefighters began their sweep. I spotted a few cloaked figures slipping away into the night but didn't pursue them. The police arrived shortly after. I gave my statement, omitting certain details to avoid sounding like a lunatic. They assured me they'd investigate. Exhausted, I checked into a hotel under an alias. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by fragmented dreams. The next morning, a news alert pinged on my phone. Notorious cult leader Silas Crowley found dead in apparent ritual suicide. The article detailed how he was discovered in an abandoned warehouse surrounded by symbols and paraphernalia. A sense of relief washed over me, tempered by skepticism. It seemed too convenient. A knock at the door startled me. I peered through the peephole to see a woman in a business suit holding a badge. "Mr. Jones, FBI, we need to talk." I opened the door cautiously. "How did you find me?" "We have our ways," she replied curtly. "May I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside. She sat down, fixing me with a piercing gaze. "Silas Crowley is dead, but his followers are still at large. We believe you're a target." "Tell me something I don't know," I sighed. "We can offer you protection, but we need full cooperation." I considered her offer. "Fine. What do you need?" "Everything you know about the cult's operations, contacts you've made, any information that could help us dismantle what's left." For the next several hours, I recounted every detail, from the campsite to the emails. As I spoke, a thought nagged at me. If Silas is dead, who sent the email? She paused. "That's what we're trying to figure out. His second-in-command, Lydia Marks, is just as dangerous, if not more." "Great, so we're back to square one." "Not entirely. With your help, we can set a trap." "Use me as bait?" She met my gaze steadily. "Essentially." I leaned back, weighing my options. Running hadn't worked, and hiding was a temporary fix at best. "All right, let's do it." Plans were set. I was to resume my normal life under surveillance. Days passed without incident. I almost began to believe the nightmare was over. Then one evening, as I returned home, the lights flickered ominously. The air felt heavy. "Showtime," I muttered. I entered cautiously. The living room was empty, but a faint sound came from the bedroom, a soft chanting. I signaled discreetly, hoping the agents were monitoring. Pushing the door open, I found Lydia standing by the window, silhouetted against the city lights. "Welcome home, Donovan," she purred. "Can't say I was expecting guests." She smiled coldly. "Silas underestimated you. I won't make the same mistake." "Funny. I was just thinking the same thing about you cult types." She stepped forward. "Join us willingly, and your transition will be painless." "Tempting, but I'll pass." She lunged, but before she could reach me, agents burst in, weapons drawn. "Freeze!" Lydia's eyes flashed with fury. In a swift motion, she pulled a knife from her sleeve. Shots rang out, and she collapsed, the blade clattering to the floor. As they secured the scene, I stood there, a whirlwind of emotions swirling, but none taking hold. The agent from before approached. "It's over," I nodded. "Is it?" She gave a half smile. For now. Weeks later, life settled into a new normal. The emails stopped and the surveillance was lifted. The FBI assured me the cult had been dismantled. One evening, as I sorted through my mail, I found an unmarked envelope. Inside was a photograph of Silas and Lydia standing in front of a farmhouse, with me in the background, unaware. Scrawled on the back were the words, "See you soon." I stared at it, a mix of dread and resignation. Maybe the cycle wasn't broken, but at least I knew what I was up against. In that moment, I realized Silas Crowley wasn't just a man, but the embodiment of an idea, one that wouldn't die easily. But neither would I. My name is Frank Lopez, and back in 2019, I took my RV out to the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. I figured some fresh mountain air would do me good, and maybe I'd finally finish that novel I've been pretending to write for the past 5 years. You know, the one that's supposed to be the next big thing, but currently exists as a grand total of 2 paragraphs. I parked my RV at a secluded spot near a quiet stream, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to touch the sky. Setting up camp was straightforward enough. Unfold the chair, light the grill, and try not to burn dinner like I usually do. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I settled in with a lukewarm beer and my notebook, hoping inspiration might strike. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The first night was uneventful, aside from a raccoon that managed to outsmart me and steal half a loaf of bread. Clever little thief. I woke up the next morning to the sound of birds chirping and leaves rustling, a welcome change from the city noise I'm accustomed to. Deciding to explore, I grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with snacks, a map, and a canteen, and headed out. After a couple of hours hiking, I stumbled upon an old wooden sign that read "Trail Closed." The path looked fine to me, and my curiosity got the better of my common sense. Rules are more like guidelines anyway, I muttered, stepping over the broken chain blocking the trail. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? I'd get lost and have to eat my terrible cooking for survival. The trail led me deeper into the woods, and the sounds of wildlife grew quieter. The air felt heavier, and the trees seemed denser, their branches knitting together to block out the sun. I checked my watch. It was only noon, but it felt like dusk. Just as I considered turning back, I heard voices up ahead. Relief washed over me. At least I wasn't the only idiot ignoring warning signs. I followed the muffled sounds until I reached a clearing. What I saw made me freeze. A group of men stood around a makeshift table covered with packages and firearms. They were engrossed in a heated discussion, their faces obscured by baseball caps and sunglasses. Drug dealers, I realized with a jolt. This was definitely not the book club meeting I was hoping for. My mind raced. Retreating quietly seemed like the best option. But of course, fate had other plans. A twig snapped under my foot, sounding louder than a gunshot in the eerie silence. "Who's there?" one of them shouted, his hand moving to the pistol at his waist. Panicking, I did the only logical thing. I ran. Branches whipped against my face as I tore through the forest, the angry shouts of the men echoing behind me. "Stop! We just want to talk!" they yelled, which was about as comforting as a tax audit. I zigzagged through the trees, hoping to lose them, but these guys knew the terrain better than I did. My lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly, but adrenaline kept me moving. I burst into another clearing and skidded to a halt. In front of me was a steep drop into a rocky ravine. "Well, isn't this just grand?" I muttered. Footsteps crashed through the underbrush behind me. With no time to think, I scrambled along the edge, searching for a way down that wouldn't result in a broken leg. Or worse. A gunshot rang out, the bullet hitting a tree trunk inches from my head. This isn't exactly the kind of camping excitement I signed up for, I yelled, more to myself than anyone else. Spotting a narrow path leading downward, I took it, nearly slipping several times on the loose rocks. The shouts grew fainter, and I allowed myself a moment to catch my breath at the bottom. My reprieve was short-lived. Ahead of me lay a maze of abandoned mining tunnels. Given my stellar luck so far, I figured, why not delve into a dark, creepy tunnel? After all, I hadn't had my daily dose of poor decisions. Entering the mine, I was enveloped in darkness, so complete it felt tangible. I fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight, silently cursing myself for not bringing a real one. The weak beam illuminated just enough to keep me from tripping. The air was stale, carrying the scent of damp earth and rusted metal. As I moved deeper, I heard the faint echo of footsteps behind me. "You've got to be kidding me," I whispered. These guys were relentless. I picked up the pace, the tunnel branching off in multiple directions, left, right, then left again. I had no idea where I was going. My navigational skills were about as good as my cooking. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath me, and I tumbled down a shaft, landing hard on a pile of debris. Pain shot through my ankle. Fantastic. Sprained ankle in a horror movie scenario, I groaned. Above me, shadows moved. The men peered down, their faces still hidden, but their intentions clear. "You've seen too much," one of them said coldly. "Can't let you leave." "Look, I promise I didn't see anything. I'm as blind as a bat without echolocation skills," I shouted back, attempting humor that fell flat. They began climbing down, and I knew I had to move. Ignoring the throbbing pain, I limped through a narrow passageway. The tunnel opened up into a cavern where old mining equipment lay abandoned. An idea sparked. Grabbing a rusted pickaxe, I positioned myself behind a support beam. As the first man entered, I swung with all my might. The pickaxe connected with a sickening thud, and he collapsed. I didn't have time to process the grim reality. I had to defend myself. The second man lunged at me, tackling me to the ground. We grappled, his hands squeezing around my throat. Spots danced in my vision. Desperate, I reached out and grabbed a loose rock, smashing it against his head. He slumped over, unconscious or worse. I didn't check. Staggering to my feet, I searched for an exit. A glimmer of light caught my eye. A small opening above, possibly leading outside. Climbing a rickety ladder, I emerged back into the forest. The fresh air was a stark contrast to the suffocating mine, but I wasn't safe yet. I could hear more voices in the distance. Apparently, these guys had a bigger operation than I thought. I hobbled through the woods, each step agony. Breaking through the tree line, I spotted a ranger station. Relief flooded me. Using the last of my strength, I made my way there, bursting inside. I startled a lone park ranger sipping coffee. "Help! They're after me!" I gasped. He sprang into action, grabbing his radio and calling for backup. "Calm down, son. Who's after you?" "Armed men in the woods? Drug dealers, I think. I might have injured 2 of them." Within minutes, the place was swarming with law enforcement. They organized a search team and headed into the forest. I was taken to a nearby hospital to treat my injuries. Later, I learned that the authorities found evidence of a large drug operation hidden in the old mine tunnels. Several suspects were arrested, but the leader, a man named Marcus "Snake" Reynolds, managed to escape. He was notorious for his brutality and had been on the run for years. As for me, I decided that maybe the great outdoors weren't so great after all. My RV became a permanent fixture in my driveway, and I took up riding at home, where the only danger was running out of coffee. My name is John Campbell, and I'm 27 years old. I've always loved the outdoors, camping, hiking, being surrounded by the quiet beauty of nature. But what happened in the Monongahela National Forest last October changed the way I see the wilderness forever. It was supposed to be a weekend trip, a chance to reconnect with old friends and prove to myself that I could still find peace out there, even after everything I'd been through. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. It started as a casual idea during a group chat. Ryan Morales, my best friend from college, suggested we tackle an unmarked trail near Crum Knob. "Breathtaking views, barely anyone around," he'd said. That was all Ryan needed to hear, an adventure far off the beaten path. Lila Barnes, the mediator of our trio, had been hesitant but relented. She was the sensitive type, a believer in energy and spirits, but she loved the idea of spending time with us. And me? I just wanted to prove I wasn't afraid anymore. The morning we arrived, the trailhead was everything Ryan had promised, isolated and overgrown, the kind of place most people wouldn't bother with. I double-checked my gear, a good sleeping bag, weatherproof tent, high-powered flashlight, and enough food to last us longer than we planned to stay. Ryan, of course, had packed light. Too light. "You brought that?" I said, eyeing his flimsy-looking sleeping bag. "It's fine, Michael," he replied with a grin. "I'm not planning to freeze to death." Lila rolled her eyes. "You're going to complain the whole time, aren't you?" We set off late morning, the sun filtering through the dense canopy of the forest. At first, everything felt normal. Birds chirped, leaves rustled in the breeze, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. The trail was rough, but I'd expected that. What I didn't expect was how quickly the atmosphere would change. By mid-afternoon, we were deep in the woods, and the familiar sounds of nature started to fade. The birds stopped singing. The trees, once so vibrant, seemed darker, almost menacing. Even the air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on us. Lila was the first to mention it. "Does it feel quieter to you guys?" she asked, her voice tinged with unease. Ryan laughed it off. "It's just the wind dying down. Don't psych yourself out." I wanted to believe him, but something about the silence wasn't natural. It wasn't just quiet. It was oppressive, like the forest itself was holding its breath. As the day wore on, the trail became harder to follow. Signs of human passage disappeared, replaced by thick underbrush and moss-covered rocks. My map was useless. Ryan teased me about overthinking, but when we came across a weathered wooden sign with the words "turn back" barely legible beneath layers of grime, even he fell silent. "It's probably just a joke," he said after a moment. "Someone trying to scare off hikers." Lila shook her head. "Feels like a warning." Despite my growing unease, I didn't want to back out. I needed to finish this hike to prove to myself that I could handle it. So, we pressed on. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the forest grew colder and darker. That night, we set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering trees. Ryan got the fire going while Lila and I prepared our tents. As we settled in for the night, the usual camaraderie returned. We joked, ate, and shared stories around the fire. For a moment it felt like old times, until we heard the scream. It came from deep in the woods, a shrill, piercing cry that froze me in place. Lila's face went pale, and Ryan stood up, flashlight in hand. "Probably an animal," he said, though his voice lacked its usual bravado. "No animal makes a sound like that," Lila whispered. We listened, straining to hear anything over the crackling of the fire. For a long moment there was nothing. Then faintly, I heard it. Someone calling my name. "Michael." It was a soft, lilting voice, barely audible but unmistakable. My stomach churned. It sounded like my brother Nate. He died when I was 16, lost in the woods during a family camping trip. I knew it couldn't be him, but the voice was so eerily familiar. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Ryan said, scanning the trees with his flashlight. "It said my name," I insisted. "It sounded like." Before I could finish, Ryan's light flickered and died. "Damn thing's out of batteries," he muttered. We retreated to our tents after that, but sleep didn't come easily. The sounds outside, branches snapping, faint whispers, kept me awake. I gripped my flashlight tightly, my heart pounding with every noise. The next morning, we discovered something strange. Around our campsite were large footprints, almost human, but with elongated toes and a strange, claw-like shape at the end. They circled the fire pit and disappeared into the woods. Ryan tried to laugh it off, calling it a prank, but Lila and I weren't so sure. As we packed up to leave, the forest felt even more hostile. Shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, and the oppressive silence followed us. Then, around noon, we heard it again. Someone calling for help. "Ryan!" The voice was desperate, pleading. "That's me," Ryan said, stopping in his tracks. "No, it's not," Lila snapped. "You're right here. That's not you." The voice called out again, closer this time. Ryan, always the skeptic, marched toward the sound despite our protests. He disappeared into the trees, leaving Lila and me alone on the trail. Minutes passed, then an hour. When he finally returned, something about him was off. His skin was pale, his eyes distant. He spoke little, his usual confidence replaced by an eerie calm. Lila and I exchanged worried glances but didn't press him, not yet. As night fell, the tension between us grew. Lila whispered to me that she'd seen Ryan standing outside her tent the night before, staring into the woods. "I don't think it's him," she said, her voice shaking. "I think it's something else." I wanted to dismiss her fear as paranoia, but when Ryan spoke, his voice sounded wrong. There was a guttural edge to it, something not quite human. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities. Was he possessed? Was I imagining things? The next day, everything unraveled. Ryan's behavior grew stranger. He refused to eat, instead watching us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. At one point, he muttered something under his breath, words I couldn't understand, but that sent a chill down my spine. Lila was the first to snap. "You're not Ryan," she said, backing away from him. "What are you?" He laughed, a low, hollow sound that echoed through the trees. You don't want to know. That was the moment I knew we had to leave. But Ryan, or whatever he'd become, wasn't going to let us go easily. As we packed, he stood between us and the trail, his grin stretching impossibly wide. His eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to swallow the light. You can't leave, he said. Not yet. When he lunged, I didn't think, I just acted. I grabbed the canister of fuel from my pack and hurled it at him, igniting it with my lighter. Flames roared to life, spreading quickly through the dry brush. Ryan, or the thing wearing his face, shrieked and stumbled backward, disappearing into the inferno. Lila and I ran, the fire spreading behind us, consuming everything in its path. By the time we reached the trailhead, we were covered in soot and barely able to stand. Ryan was gone. We reported him missing, but no trace of him was ever found. Weeks later, I received a voicemail from his number. His voice, distorted and filled with static, whispered my name, Michael. Come back. I deleted it, but the memory lingers. The forest isn't just a place of beauty and solitude. It has its own rules, its own predators, and some things should never be found. My name is Walter Phillips, and back in 2015, I took my RV up to the rugged coastlines of Acadia National Park in Maine. I figured it was time to trade my computer screen for some trees. After all, my doctor said that touching grass wasn't just a meme, but actual medical advice. You see, I've been a software engineer for the past 11 years, and my idea of a wild time is merging code without any conflicts. So when my buddy Jeff bet me that I couldn't survive a week without Wi-Fi, I took it as a personal challenge. Plus, I thought it would make for a great story to tell at parties, assuming I ever started going to those. The drive to Acadia was surprisingly smooth, aside from my RV's GPS trying to reroute me into the Atlantic Ocean. Recalculating? More like miscalculating, I muttered. By the time I reached the park, the sun was casting golden hues over the granite cliffs, and I felt a strange mix of excitement and sheer terror. Nature and I aren't exactly on speaking terms, but hey, even introverts need some vitamin D. I found a secluded spot near a cluster of pine trees overlooking the ocean. It was breathtaking. I set up camp, lit a fire after watching a quick tutorial I had downloaded beforehand, old habits die hard, and settled into a folding chair with a paperback novel. Look at me, living like a 19th century poet, I chuckled. As night fell, the stars emerged in a dazzling display I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Away from the city lights, the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a spilled carton of glitter. I was so absorbed that I almost didn't notice the faint sound of footsteps behind me. Expecting company? I joked to myself, turning around. Nothing but trees and shadows. Must have been a critter, or so I hoped. I decided it was a good time to retreat into the safety of my RV. You know, the one with locks. The next morning, I decided to go for a hike along one of the less traveled trails. Armed with a map, a compass I barely knew how to use, and enough trail mix to feed a small village, I set off. The forest was serene, filled with the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. I even started whistling a tune, feeling oddly at peace. About 2 miles in, I came across an old man sitting on a fallen log, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up as I approached. "Morning," I said. He gave a curt nod. "Not many folks come down this path," he remarked. "Well, I'm not like most folks," I replied with a grin. "Thought I'd try the road less traveled." He looked me up and down. "Be careful out there. Strange things happen in these woods." "Strange like what? Bears scheduling picnics?" I chuckled. He didn't laugh. "Just watch yourself," he said, returning to his whittling. "Will do," I replied, moving along. "Thanks for the ominous warning." As I continued, the trees seemed to close in, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. The trail became less defined, but I was sure I could find my way back. After all, I had a compass, though I was starting to suspect it was just a fancy paperweight. An hour later, I realized I was hopelessly lost. "Great job, Thaddeus. You had one job. Don't get lost in the woods," I muttered. I pulled out my map, but it might as well have been written in hieroglyphics. The forest was eerily quiet now, the kind of silence that amplifies every snap of a twig. Then, in the distance, I heard voices. 2 people arguing. Relieved at the prospect of finding someone who could point me in the right direction, I headed toward the sound. As I got closer, the voices became clearer. "I'm telling you, we need to move them tonight," a gruff voice said. "And I'm telling you it's too risky with that camper around," another voice hissed. I froze. Camper? Were they talking about me? Carefully, I crept forward and peered through the bushes into a small clearing. What I saw made my stomach drop. Two men stood next to what looked like large tarp-covered mounds. One of them pulled back the tarp, revealing stacks of wooden crates. Curiosity got the better of me, and I squinted to read the markings on the boxes. "Military grade," I whispered. This was way above my pay grade. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. "Lost, friend?" A deep voice rumbled behind me. I spun around to face a towering man with a cold stare. "Oh, hey there. Just trying to find my way back to the trail," I stammered. He looked me up and down, his gaze settling on the compass dangling uselessly from my neck. "Doesn't seem like you're from around here." "Just visiting," I said, forcing a smile. "Thought I'd enjoy some nature. Maybe wrestle a bear for a selfie." He didn't laugh. "Why don't you come with me? We can help you get situated." "That's really not necessary," I replied, backing away. "I'm sure I can find my way back." He reached for something behind his back and instinct kicked in. Without thinking, I bolted in the opposite direction. Adrenaline surged as I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping against my face. Behind me, I heard shouts and the pounding of heavy footsteps. "Stop!" one of them yelled. "You can't run forever!" "Watch me!" I shouted back, immediately regretting giving away my position. I stumbled upon a narrow stream and decided to follow it, hoping it would lead me back to civilization, or at least put some distance between me and my new friends. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like jelly, but I couldn't stop. Just when I thought I might have lost them, a shot rang out, splintering a tree trunk inches from my head. "They're shooting at me. Over what? Trespassing?" I gasped, ducking behind a boulder. I tried to catch my breath. "Think, Thaddeus, think. What would Bear Grylls do? Probably something involving drinking his own urine. Not helpful." I remembered the emergency whistle attached to my backpack. Grabbing it, I blew as hard as I could, the shrill sound piercing the forest silence. "Help!" I yelled between whistles. "Anyone?" "Keep making noise and you'll wish we only shot at you." Look, a voice threatened from somewhere behind me. Spotting a fallen tree stretching across the stream, I scrambled over it, nearly slipping on the moss-covered surface. On the other side, the terrain sloped upward. Maybe if I could get to higher ground, I'd get a cell signal. Breaking through the tree line, I emerged onto a dirt road. And there, like a mirage, was a park ranger's truck. Waving my arms frantically, I sprinted toward it. "Hey! Stop!" The ranger stepped out, surprised. "What's going on?" "Two men. They're after me. They're armed." His eyes widened. "Get in." We jumped into the truck, and he radioed for backup as we sped away. "You're lucky you found me," he said. "This area isn't usually patrolled." "Story of my life," I sighed. Right place, right time for once. Back at the ranger station, I recounted everything. As I described the men in the crates, the rangers exchanged glances. "Did I stumble into something I shouldn't have?" I asked. "Those men have been under investigation," one ranger explained. "Illegal arms dealers using the park as a transit point." Great. And here I was thinking the biggest danger I'd face was undercooked s'mores. They assured me they'd handle it and advised me to stay within populated areas for the remainder of my trip. Not needing more encouragement, I decided to cut my adventure short. As I packed up my RV, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. But a thorough scan of the area showed nothing unusual. Maybe I was just jumpy, or maybe I needed to invest in some less adventurous hobbies like knitting. Before leaving town, I stopped by a local diner for one last decent meal. The waitress, a cheerful woman named Mabel, poured me a coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Not a ghost, just the darker side of human nature," I replied. She raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like there's a story there." Let's just say I won't be winning any hide-and-seek championships. As I was about to pay, I noticed a newspaper on the counter with a headline that caught my eye. "Rangers bust arms trafficking ring in Acadia." "Well, I'll be," I murmured. "Crazy world we live in," Mabel commented. "You never know what's happening right under your nose." "Tell me about it," I said, leaving a generous tip. Back on the road, I reflected on my not-so-relaxing getaway. Maybe nature and I weren't meant to be after all. Or maybe I just needed to pick safer parks, ones not hosting clandestine criminal activities. As I crossed state lines, my phone buzzed with a message from Jeff. "Survive without Wi-Fi yet?" I smirked and typed back, "You have no idea." Later that evening, parked at a well-lit campground with plenty of families around, I decided to do a bit of digging. Curiosity killed the cat, they say, but satisfaction brought it back. Using the diner's Wi-Fi, old habits, I researched recent arrests in the area. One name stood out: Victor Lang, a former military officer turned arms dealer known for his ruthless tactics and extensive network. His mugshot sent a chill down my spine. It was the man who'd grabbed my shoulder in the woods. "Well, Victor, looks like your camping days are over," I muttered. I learned that the Rangers' intervention had been timely. They'd seized a significant cache of weapons destined for illegal sale. Several associates were still at large, but the operation had been crippled. Feeling a mix of relief and residual adrenaline, I shut my laptop. Maybe I hadn't been a hero, but at least I'd inadvertently helped stop a criminal. Not bad for a guy whose biggest daily challenge was deciding between tabs or spaces in code. Settling into bed, I thought about the irony of escaping to nature to find peace and stumbling into a crime ring instead. Next time, I'm booking a beach resort, I chuckled to myself as I drifted off. The sounds of the campground, kids laughing, firewood crackling, were a comforting lullaby. For once, I felt connected to the world around me, even if it hadn't gone as planned. The next morning, I started the long drive home, leaving the wild adventures behind me. Little did I know that this story would become a favorite among my friends. Not that they believed half of it. But that's the thing about truth. It's often stranger than fiction. My name is Keith Mulligan, and this story happened to me in the summer of 2006. I was a camp counselor at Camp Pinewood, nestled in the heart of the Adirondacks. I've always loved the outdoors, and this job was my dream gig, spending the summer hiking, canoeing, and hanging out with kids. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, so the woods felt like home. Plus, I needed the extra cash to help pay for my college tuition. Little did I know that this summer would be anything but ordinary. Camp Pinewood had been around since the 1920s, a sprawling piece of land with cabins, a mess hall, and a big lake where we taught the kids to swim and canoe. It was a beautiful place, full of towering pines and the smell of fresh pine needles. The camp was split into boys and girls sections, each with its own set of counselors. I was in charge of Cabin 6, a group of 12-year-old boys who were more interested in causing mischief than anything else. My fellow counselors were a mixed bunch. There was Cody, who was a year older than me and acted like he owned the place. Jenny, the arts and crafts counselor with a perpetual smile, and Andy, the quiet guy who played guitar by the campfire every night. We were a tight-knit group, and after the kids went to bed, we'd sit around, share stories, drink a couple of beers we kept hidden, and just enjoy the calm of the forest night. One night, after a particularly exhausting day of wrangling the kids through a hike up to Lookout Point, we gathered around the fire. The stars were out in full force, and the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. Andy started strumming his guitar, playing a soft tune that made the woods feel even more magical. As we were talking, Cody mentioned something about the old stories the local townsfolk used to tell. "They say these woods are haunted, you know," he said, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "Haunted?" Jenny scoffed. "By what? Ghosts of campers who didn't clean their cabins?" "Nah," Cody replied, leaning in. "There's this old legend about a hermit who used to live around here. They say he went crazy, started kidnapping people, and taking them to his cabin deep in the woods. No one ever found the cabin, though." I laughed, shaking my head. "Come on, Cody, you expect us to believe that? Sounds like a story you tell to scare the new counselors." Andy stopped playing his guitar and looked up. "I've heard that story, too. My grandpa used to tell it to me when I was a kid. He swore it was true." We all sat in silence for a moment, the crackling fire the only sound. Then Jenny broke the tension with a laugh. "Well, if I see any hermits tonight, I'll be sure to ask for directions to his cabin." The next few days went by without incident. We kept the kids busy with activities and didn't think much about Cody's story. But then weird things started happening. It began with small stuff, tools missing from the shed, food disappearing from the mess hall. At first, we thought it was just the kids playing pranks. But then, one night, one of the girls from Cabin 3 went missing. Her name was Lila, a sweet kid, a bit on the shy side. Her bunkmates said they saw her go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, but she never came back. We searched the entire camp, calling her name, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, but there was no sign of her. By dawn, we had to call the local authorities. The police showed up, just a couple of officers with stern faces and serious attitudes. They combed the area and asked us a million questions, but they didn't find anything either. It was like she had vanished into thin air. The camp directors decided to keep the camp running, hoping Lila would turn up, but the atmosphere had changed. The kids were on edge, and so were we. At night, the woods seemed darker, the sounds more ominous. We kept a closer eye on our campers, never letting them wander off alone. A few nights later, I was on night duty, making sure the boys were asleep and everything was in order. Around midnight, I heard something outside, a rustling noise, like someone moving through the underbrush. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the cabin, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. "Who's there?" I called out, shining the light around. The beam cut through the darkness, but I didn't see anything. The noise had stopped. I stood there for a minute, listening, but all I could hear was the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. I was about to head back inside when I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow moving between the trees. It was quick, barely there for a second, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. The next morning, I told Cody and the others about it. They were skeptical, but Cody seemed intrigued. "Maybe it's the hermit," he said with a grin, "or maybe Lila." "Not funny, Cody," Jenny snapped. "This is serious. We need to figure out what's going on." We decided to set up a watch system, taking turns staying up at night to keep an eye on things. It was exhausting, but we didn't want to take any chances. The kids needed to be safe. One night, it was my turn again. I was sitting by the fire, the only light in the darkness, when I heard it, the same rustling noise from before. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure hunched over, moving slowly through the trees. I shone the light on it, and for a brief moment I saw a face, wild eyes, unkempt hair, and a look of sheer madness. Then it was gone, disappearing into the darkness. I ran back to the cabin, my mind racing. I knew I had to tell the others. We needed to find this person, whoever they were, and make sure they didn't harm anyone else. The next day, we organized a search party. The police were already involved, but we couldn't just sit around and wait. Cody, Andy, and I, along with a couple of other counselors, headed into the woods, determined to find the source of the strange occurrences. We split up into pairs, each taking a different direction. Andy and I headed east, following a narrow trail that led deeper into the forest. The farther we went, the quieter it got, the sounds of the camp fading away. After about an hour of walking, we stumbled upon something that made my stomach churn. An old, dilapidated cabin, hidden behind a thick curtain of vines and moss. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but there were fresh footprints in the dirt leading up to the door. Andy and I exchanged a glance. "This has to be it," he whispered. We approached cautiously, our flashlights illuminating the decaying wood and broken windows. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as we pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the smell of rot and mildew. As we stepped inside, our flashlights revealed a scene straight out of a nightmare. Old furniture covered in dust, walls lined with strange symbols and drawings, and in the corner, a pile of clothes and blankets that looked like a makeshift bed. And then we saw her, Lila. She was lying on the floor, pale and unmoving. My heart sank. We rushed to her side, but it was too late. She was gone. We heard a noise behind us and turned to see the figure from the woods standing in the doorway, a crazed look in his eyes. He was holding a knife, his hand shaking as he stared at us. "Why did you come here?" he snarled. "This is my home. You shouldn't have come here." Andy and I backed away slowly, trying to keep our distance from the man. "We don't want any trouble," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just want to leave." But the man didn't listen. He lunged at us, the knife glinting in the flashlight beam. Andy managed to dodge out of the way, but I wasn't so lucky. The knife caught me in the arm, and I cried out in pain. Andy grabbed a broken piece of wood from the floor and swung it at the man, hitting him in the side. The man stumbled, giving us a chance to make a run for it. We bolted out of the cabin, our hearts pounding as we raced back toward the camp. When we finally made it back, we were out of breath and covered in sweat. We told the others what had happened, and the police were called in immediately. They found the cabin and the man, who turned out to be a local who had gone off the grid years ago. He was arrested and taken away, but the damage had already been done. The camp was shut down early that summer. The parents were notified, and the kids were sent home. It was a somber end to what was supposed to be a fun and carefree time. Lila's family was devastated, and the rest of us were left with the haunting memories of what had happened. I still think about that summer sometimes, especially when I'm out in the woods. The forest doesn't feel as safe as it used to, and I can't shake the image of that man's wild eyes. But life goes on. I'm back in college now, studying to be a teacher. Maybe one day I'll work at a camp again, but for now I'm content to stick to the classroom. As for Camp Pinewood, it's still there, abandoned and overgrown. Some say it's haunted by Lila's spirit, but I don't believe in ghosts. What happened that summer was real, and that's enough to keep me away. Looking back, I realize how close we all came to a far worse outcome. It makes me appreciate the little things more, like a quiet night or a simple walk in the park. Life is fragile, and it can change in an instant. But it also goes on, and we have to find a way to move forward, no matter how dark the past might be. My name is Jason Wiz, and I'm 32 years old. This happened in the remote woods near Spruce Knob Lake, West Virginia. I thought it would be a fun little adventure, a chance to reconnect with my old friend Mike Carson, who's 31, while writing a travel piece about hidden gems in the Appalachian wilderness. I didn't expect we'd encounter something that would haunt us forever. The trip started out as a mix of nostalgia and practicality. Mike and I used to camp together years ago, back when we both lived in the same town. Life had pulled us in different directions, but I wanted to rekindle that bond and maybe get some good material for my article. When I pitched the idea of camping by the lake, Mike hesitated. "Are you sure about that spot, Jason? I've heard weird things about that area," he said. "Come on, Mike. It'll be fine," I replied, brushing off his concerns. "What's the worst that could happen?" "Bears. We'll keep the food locked up." Reluctantly, he agreed. The following weekend, we loaded up my old RV, a temperamental beast prone to sputtering at the worst times, and headed into the mountains. The drive to Spruce Knob was stunning, with rolling hills and dense forests that seemed to swallow us whole as we ascended the winding roads. We reached the lake just before sunset. The water shimmered in the golden light, and the surrounding trees stood tall and silent, as if guarding the place. A few fishermen waved at us from a distance, but as we drove deeper into the woods to find a secluded campsite, we left the last signs of civilization behind. We parked the RV in a small clearing near the tree line. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. There were no sounds of birds, no rustling leaves, just a heavy, oppressive silence. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the quiet of nature, and we got to work setting up camp. Mike built a fire while I fiddled with the propane stove, which, true to form, refused to work. "Guess we're doing everything the old-fashioned way," I said with a laugh, though I could tell Mike was annoyed. "Should have brought my own gear," he muttered. "This thing's a death trap." That night, as we sat around the fire, we shared stories and beers, laughing about our old adventures. It felt good, like old times. But as the fire burned low, I started to notice odd things. First, there were the noises. At first, it was faint, like children's laughter carried on the wind. I froze, straining to hear, but when I asked Mike if he heard it, he shook his head. "You're imagining things," he said, tossing another log on the fire. But I wasn't. The laughter grew louder, mingling with what sounded like whispers, though I couldn't make out the words. I glanced over my shoulder at the dark woods, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a trick of the mind after a long day. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, a sickly sweet odor that made my stomach churn. It reminded me of roadkill left out in the sun for too long. Mike smelled it too, and he looked uneasy for the first time. Maybe a dead deer nearby, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. We went to bed soon after that, locking ourselves inside the RV. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was watching us. The next morning, we decided to explore the woods around the lake. I had my camera slung over my shoulder, ready to capture the natural beauty of the area. But what we found was anything but beautiful. It started with the animal carcasses. We stumbled upon a trail of them, raccoons, rabbits, even a deer, all mutilated in ways that didn't seem natural. Their bodies were arranged in a line, as if they were pointing toward something. My stomach turned, but I couldn't look away. "What the hell did this?" Mike whispered, his face pale. "I don't know," I said. "A bear? Wolves?" But deep down, I didn't believe that. The wounds were too precise, too deliberate. The trail led us to a clearing where an ancient tree stood, its gnarled branches twisting skyward like skeletal fingers. The bark was blackened as if it had been burned, but the tree was very much alive. It exuded a strange energy, making the air around it feel thick and heavy. A chill ran down my spine just looking at it. "This must be the devil's tree," Mike said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The what?" "I read about it online," he admitted. "Locals say it's cursed. Some witch was hanged here in the 1800s, and her spirit supposedly haunts it." "Great. You tell me this now?" I said, half joking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we shouldn't be there. We didn't stay long. The whispers started again, louder this time, and they seemed to be coming from the tree itself. I snapped a few photos before we retreated back to the RV. Things escalated quickly after that. That night, the whispers returned, but they weren't outside anymore. They were inside the RV. I woke up to the sound of my father's voice calling my name, even though he'd been dead for years. "Jason, come here," the voice beckoned. It sounded so real, so warm, that for a moment I believed it. But when I got up and looked outside, there was nothing there. Just the dark woods and the faint outline of the devil's tree in the distance. Mike wasn't doing any better. He claimed he saw me standing outside the RV, staring at him through the window. But I hadn't left my bed. The next morning, we found claw marks on the RV's walls, deep, jagged scratches that hadn't been there before. Mike wanted to leave, but the engine wouldn't start. No matter what we tried, the RV refused to move. "We're stuck here," he said grimly. "We need to figure out how to end this." We decided to confront the tree, though neither of us really knew what we were doing. Armed with a can of lighter fluid and a box of matches, we trekked back to the clearing. The whispers grew louder as we approached, morphing into a cacophony of voices, some pleading, some angry, some crying. My hands trembled as I doused the base of the tree with fluid. "Are you sure about this?" Mike asked, his voice shaking. "No," I admitted, "but we don't have a choice." I struck the match and tossed it onto the tree. The flames roared to life, but almost immediately they were snuffed out, as if an unseen hand had smothered them. The air grew cold, and the shadows around us began to move. That's when we saw it, a figure emerging from the tree itself. It was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes and a mouth that stretched too wide. It didn't move toward us, but its presence was enough to paralyze me with fear. "You trespassed," it said, though its lips didn't move. "Blood for blood." Mike grabbed my arm, snapping me out of my trance. "Run!" he shouted. We bolted back toward the RV. The entity didn't follow us, but its voice echoed in our heads, growing fainter the farther we ran. Back at the RV, we found a knife and debated what to do. The entity wanted blood. Did it mean a sacrifice? I wasn't about to offer myself or Mike, but we had to do something. In a desperate act, I cut my palm and let the blood drip onto the ground outside the RV. I didn't know if it would work, but the whispers stopped almost immediately. The air grew warmer and the oppressive feeling lifted. A moment later, the RV roared to life on its own. Without wasting another second, we got in and drove away, leaving the devil's tree behind. I never wrote about that trip. Not the truth, anyway. The article I published was a generic piece about camping tips and scenic views, but the memory of what happened near Spruce Knob Lake still lingers. I don't know if the entity is gone for good, or if it's waiting for the next trespasser to stumble upon its cursed domain. All I know is I'm never going back. I'd always thought that road trips were a great way to clear my head. Growing up in Chicago, I'd gotten used to the bustling noise and constant movement, but sometimes I needed to escape the chaos and find a bit of peace. That's why I found myself driving through the remote backroads of West Virginia. My name is Byron Chadwick, and I was looking for a bit of solitude. I guess I found more than I'd bargained for. The trip had started out fine. I'd left Chicago at the crack of dawn with the goal of reaching a quaint little town called Harper's Ferry by sunset. The roads were winding, and my old Chevy's radio only picked up static, but the silence was welcome. I was deep into the countryside by noon, surrounded by thick forests and the occasional farm. The GPS on my phone had been working fine until I hit a particularly dense part of the forest. That's when the signal dropped. No big deal, I thought. I downloaded the map earlier, I could navigate without a problem, but then I took a wrong turn. And another. Before I knew it, I was completely off course. I wasn't too worried. These things happened. I just had to find my way back to the main road. As I drove deeper into the forest, the sun started to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows that made the scenery even more eerie. I decided to stop and ask for directions at the next house I saw. That's when I came across an old dilapidated farmhouse. It looked abandoned, but there was a light on inside. I pulled up the driveway and killed the engine. The place gave off an unsettling vibe, but I was out of options. I walked up to the door and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged man with a gaunt face and unkempt hair. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Yeah, I'm lost," I replied. "Can you tell me how to get back to the main road?" He stared at me for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in, I'll get you a map." I hesitated, but stepped inside. The house was dark and smelled musty, like it hadn't been lived in for a long time. The man disappeared into another room, leaving me alone in the dimly lit hallway. As I waited, I heard a faint noise coming from the basement. It sounded like a whimper. Curiosity got the better of me. I moved toward the sound, finding a door that led to the basement. I opened it slowly, the creaking hinges echoing in the quiet house. The smell hit me first. Rotting flesh and decay. I gagged, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I descended the stairs, the darkness enveloping me as I went deeper. The whimpering grew louder, more desperate. I reached the bottom and flicked on the light switch. The sight that met me was like something out of a nightmare. There were cages, rusty and old, lining the walls. Inside them were people, emaciated, dirty, and terrified. Some were unconscious, others were crying softly. My heart pounded in my chest. What the hell was going on here? Before I could react, I felt a heavy blow to the back of my head. I collapsed to the ground, my vision blurring. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was the man standing over me, a sinister grin on his face. I woke up in one of the cages, my head throbbing. I tried to move, but my hands and feet were bound. Panic set in as I realized the gravity of my situation. I wasn't just lost anymore. I was a prisoner. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time seemed to blur together in that dark, stinking basement. The other captives were too weak to speak, their spirits broken. I knew I had to get out of there, but I needed a plan. One day, the man came down with his family, 2 men and a woman, all as twisted and deranged as he was. They carried knives and machetes, their intentions clear. They'd come to take one of us to do God knows what. I watched in horror as they dragged a young woman out of her cage, her screams piercing the silence. The door was left ajar, a small sliver of hope. I waited until they were distracted, then used all my strength to break free of my bindings. My wrists bled as I worked the rope loose. But I didn't care. I had to move fast. I slipped out of the cage and made my way to the door. The family was busy with their sick ritual, giving me just enough time to sneak past them. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding, adrenaline fueling my every step. Once outside, I sprinted to my car, praying it would start. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, not daring to look back. I drove until I found a gas station, bursting through the door and begging the clerk to call the police. The authorities arrived quickly, and I led them back to the farmhouse. What they found there was enough to make seasoned officers turn pale. The basement was a scene of utter horror, but the captives were rescued and the family was arrested. I learned later that the farmhouse had been abandoned for years before that twisted family moved in. They had been preying on travelers, people who wouldn't be missed. I was lucky to escape with my life. The police took my statement and I was free to go. I got back into my car, the relief washing over me as I drove away from that hellish place. The road stretched out before me, a promise of safety and normalcy. The farmhouse was demolished, its dark history buried beneath the rubble. The captives were taken to the hospital, and I went back to Chicago, grateful to be alive. I never took a road trip again. My name is Jose Walker, and back in 2016, I took my RV up to the Custer National Forest in Montana. I figured escaping the city for a week would do me good, even if my idea of roughing it usually involves forgetting my phone charger. After a grueling year crunching numbers as an accountant, I craved the simplicity of the wilderness. No spreadsheets, no meetings, just me and the great outdoors. I joked with my friends that I'd probably get lost without GPS, but secretly I was excited for an adventure. The drive was serene. Towering pines lined the winding roads, and the crisp mountain air seeped through my open windows. I hummed along to classic rock tunes, feeling lighter with each mile that distanced me from the concrete jungle. Upon arriving at the campground, I noticed it was sparsely populated, exactly what I wanted. I parked my RV in a secluded spot near a gentle stream. As I set up camp, an older man named Hank strolled over from a nearby site. "First time up here?" he asked, a friendly grin beneath his bushy mustache. "Is it that obvious?" I chuckled, wrestling with a tent pole that seemed determined to defy me. He laughed. "Need a hand?" "Sure, unless you want front row seats to me losing a fight with camping gear." Together, we got the tent pitched in no time. Hank shared a few tips about the area. Good fishing spots, trails worth hiking, places to avoid. He mentioned a trail that led to an old abandoned mining town a few miles deeper into the forest. "Why is it abandoned?" I asked. "Just dried up," he said with a shrug. "But some folks say it's haunted." I raised an eyebrow. "Ghost stories already? You work fast." He smiled. "Just keeping the tradition alive. You take care out here." That evening, I built a small campfire and cooked dinner. The stars emerged, brighter than I'd ever seen them. As I sat there, sipping a beer, I felt a contentment that had eluded me for years. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to hike to the old mining town Hank had mentioned. I packed a day bag, grabbed my map, and set off. The trail was overgrown in places, but the path was still visible. About an hour in, I stumbled upon a dilapidated cabin. It looked like it hadn't seen visitors in decades. The door hung ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. I peered inside, just old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. "Looks like the cleaning service skipped this one," I muttered. Continuing on, I noticed the forest grew denser. The canopy above thickened, filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. The air felt cooler, and the sounds of wildlife seemed to fade. After another hour, I reached the remnants of the mining town. Weathered buildings leaned at precarious angles. Windows were shattered, roofs caved in. There was an eerie stillness to the place. I wandered through the main street, or what was left of it, taking in the ghostly atmosphere. As I approached what appeared to be an old general store, I spotted fresh footprints in the dirt. Maybe Hank wasn't kidding about ghosts, I joked to myself, though a prickle of unease ran up my neck. I followed the footprints around the back of the store and found a makeshift campsite. There was a small tent, a smoldering fire pit, and scattered belongings. It looked recently abandoned. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone here?" No response. I glanced around. There was a notebook lying near the tent. Curiosity piqued. I picked it up. Flipping through the pages, I realized it was filled with handwritten notes, ramblings about purification, cleansing, and making sacrifices to redeem the unworthy. "Well, that's not creepy at all," I whispered, my attempt at humor falling flat. A sudden snap of a twig made me spin around. A man stood a few yards away, watching me intently. He was tall and gaunt, with unkempt hair and clothes that looked like they'd been through a war zone. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "You're trespassing," he replied, his voice flat. "Sorry, I didn't realize. I thought this was abandoned." He took a step closer. "It's not. Leave." "All right, no problem. I'll get out of your hair." I placed the notebook back where I found it and started to walk away. Something about the man's gaze unsettled me. As I retraced my steps out of the town, I felt his eyes boring into my back. The return hike seemed longer. Every rustle in the underbrush made me jump. I chided myself for being paranoid. Back at my campsite, I tried to shake off the encounter. I spent the afternoon fishing at the stream, catching nothing but enjoying the tranquility. By evening, I'd almost forgotten about the strange man. As darkness fell, I settled in by the fire with a book. The silence was comforting until it was broken by the distant sound of footsteps. I looked up, expecting to see Hank or another camper, but saw nothing. Probably an animal, I told myself. An hour later, I heard the footsteps again, closer this time. I stood up, shining my flashlight into the woods. The beam illuminated the trees but revealed nothing else. Hello, is someone there? Silence. Unease crept back in. Deciding it was best to turn in, I locked the RV door and settled into bed. Sleep came fitfully. A loud thud jolted me awake. I sat up, heart pounding. The clock read 2:17 a.m. Holding my breath, I listened intently. Another thud, this time accompanied by the sound of something scraping against the RV's exterior. I crept to the window and peeked out. In the dim moonlight, I saw a figure standing near the fire pit. It was the man from the mining town. He was holding something long and sharp, a machete. Okay, this is officially not funny, I whispered. He began circling the RV, dragging the machete along the metal side, creating a shrill, grating noise. My mind raced. I reached for my phone to call for help. No signal, of course. Should have invested in that satellite phone, I muttered. I remembered the flare gun stashed in the emergency kit. Grabbing it, I weighed my options. Firing it might scare him off or attract help. As I contemplated, a voice called out, "Come out. We need to talk." "Yeah, I bet we do," I said under my breath. He banged on the door. "You're contaminated. You need cleansing." "Fantastic. A lunatic. Leave now, or I'll call the police," I shouted. He laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "They can't help you out here." I loaded the flare gun, aimed it at the door, and waited. Suddenly, the window beside me shattered. I stumbled back as his arm reached through, swiping the machete wildly. Without thinking, I fired the flare gun. The flare struck his arm, igniting his sleeve. He screamed, pulling back and stumbling away from the RV. Seizing the moment, I grabbed my keys, dashed to the driver's seat, and started the engine. The RV roared to life. I slammed it into gear, knocking over camping chairs and supplies as I sped down the dirt road. In the side mirror, I saw the man standing in the middle of the road, flames flickering on his arm, watching me disappear into the night. My hands trembled on the wheel. I needed to get to safety. The nearest ranger station was miles away, but I didn't dare stop. After what felt like an eternity, I saw lights ahead, the ranger station. I reported what happened. They took our statements, looked through the torn-up clothes, and even brought in a few other rangers to comb through the area. One of them, an older guy, pulled me aside, mentioning that they'd been tracking rumors of people disappearing around those woods for years, but had never found enough evidence to act on it. He muttered about strange types that passed through Glacier, but when I asked if he'd ever heard of Rick, he just shook his head, looking uneasy. The woman I'd saved never gave me her name, just thanked me before hitching a ride out of town with another ranger. I can't blame her for wanting to put as much distance between herself and that place as possible. Later, I heard a few of the rangers talking about what they'd found when they checked the site we'd escaped from. More clothes, scattered bones. Not animal bones either. They were all arranged in strange patterns, like some twisted display. The older ranger looked at me and said it seemed like some kind of ritual, a grim collection of people who'd likely never be identified. He didn't say more, but I saw it in his face. Whatever they'd found, it was enough to disturb even a man who'd seen just about everything. I packed up my RV that night, left Glacier National Park, and never looked back. Whatever Rick was doing out there, whatever twisted purpose drove him, I wanted no part of it. He'd shown me exactly what he was capable of, and I had no doubt he'd keep going, with or without us. And as I crossed state lines, I kept seeing his face in my mind, that eerie calm, the way he talked about his subjects. The forest around Salt Fork State Park stretched endlessly, trees rising like sentinels into the autumn sky. I parked my RV in the last open spot near the lake, eager for solitude and inspiration. My plan was simple: a week of hiking, photographing the changing leaves, and maybe rediscovering the piece of myself I'd lost over the past year. The first 2 days were peaceful. The trails were stunning, each turn revealing new bursts of color. The air was crisp and invigorating, and I felt alive in a way I hadn't since leaving my corporate job. But by the third day, a creeping unease settled over me. I first noticed it at the bait shop near the lake. An older man named Dave struck up a conversation while I was buying a map. He had leathery skin and a fisherman's easy grin, but his tone turned serious when he asked where I was staying. "Out by the lake," I said, near Hozek's cave. He frowned, shaking his head. "Be careful out there. There's a reason people don't camp alone in these parts." "Why's that?" I asked. "They say a hermit lives in those woods, been there for decades, long after he went mad. Some folks think he's more than just a man now. The forest does strange things to people." I laughed it off, but his words stuck with me. That night, I lay awake in the RV, the wind rattling the trees outside. Every creak and groan of the RV's frame sounded unnaturally loud. Once, I swore I heard footsteps crunching the gravel outside. But when I peeked out the window, the campsite was empty. The next morning, I set out early with my camera, determined to shake the lingering fear. The forest was beautiful under the morning sun, golden light streaming through the canopy. I snapped dozens of photos: dew on spiderwebs, the jagged bark of oaks, the reflection of the lake's glassy surface. I hiked toward Hozek's cave around midday. The trail was steeper than I anticipated, winding through thick brush. I almost missed the entrance, a dark slash in the rock face, barely visible beneath the moss. Stepping closer, I saw strange carvings etched into the stone, spirals and stick figures, deeply grooved but weathered with age. I snapped a picture, though something about the symbols unsettled me. As I turned to leave, movement caught my eye. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden behind a tree. He was gaunt, his clothes tattered and hanging loosely from his frame. His face was shadowed, but I could feel his gaze locked on me. "Hello," I called. My voice echoed. He didn't respond, just stared. I slung my camera over my shoulder and backed away, my heart pounding. When I glanced back a moment later, he was gone. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The RV, usually a sanctuary, felt too small, too exposed. As darkness fell, the noises began again. Soft tapping on the windows, the faint crunch of gravel. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door, but the beam illuminated nothing but empty forest. Then I noticed them, handprints smeared faintly on the glass. My stomach turned. The prints were too large to be mine, and they hadn't been there earlier. The next morning, I debated leaving. I should have. But something about the man in the carvings tugged at me. Who was he? Why had he been watching me? Against my better judgment, I decided to hike back to Hozek's cave. This time in the early afternoon. The trail felt different. The woods were silent. No rustling leaves or bird calls, only the crunch of my boots. As I approached the cave, I heard it, faint murmurs like voices carried on the wind. My name whispered so softly, I almost thought I imagined it. Nina. I froze. The whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent. They weren't coming from the cave, but from deeper in the forest. Against every instinct, I followed them. The trail dissolved into dense underbrush, branches clawing at my arms and legs. The voices were clearer now, overlapping and chaotic. Some sounded like my mother, others like my ex-boyfriend. I stumbled into a clearing and gasped. The hermit stood at the center, his back to me. Around him were crude wooden effigies, tied with strips of cloth and hair. He turned slowly, his face hollowed and pale, his eyes dark pits. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice a rasp. "I didn't mean to intrude," I stammered, stepping back. "You're in it now," he said, taking a step closer. "The forest sees you. It doesn't let go." I turned and ran. I don't remember how I found my way back to the RV, only that my legs ached and my breath came in ragged gasps. I locked the doors and tried to calm myself, but the whispers followed, louder now. My name echoed from all directions. When night fell, I realized I wasn't safe. Shadows moved outside the windows, and the tapping returned, rhythmic and deliberate. Then came the knocking, heavy and slow, rattling the RV. My camera sat on the table, its strap dangling over the edge. Desperate for proof, or maybe for distraction, I picked it up. I scrolled through the photos from the day and froze. In every shot, the hermit was there, hiding in the background behind trees, crouched near the cave, watching me. A loud thud jolted me from my seat. The door handle jiggled. My breath hitched. "Go away," I screamed. The handle stilled. A soft voice, barely audible, came from the other side. "Let me in." It wasn't the hermit's voice. It was mine. I didn't sleep that night, sitting with my back to the wall, clutching a kitchen knife. The knocking stopped after a while, but the whispers never did. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I started the RV and drove, not stopping until I reached the highway. But as I drove, the forest didn't seem to end. The road twisted endlessly through the same towering trees. My GPS flickered, the map refusing to load. It wasn't until I reached a rest stop that I allowed myself to breathe. The parking lot was empty, but it felt safer than the endless woods. I grabbed my camera, desperate to delete the photos. But as I scrolled, a new image appeared. It was me, sitting in the RV, staring at the camera. Behind me stood the hermit, his hollow eyes locked on mine. The last thing I remember is a tap on the window, followed by a whisper, "Nina." The screen went black, and so did everything else. It all began with the idea of a simple solo RV camping trip. A chance to escape from the suffocating grind of my hectic life. The promise of the open road, the vast wilderness, and the solitude of nature seemed like the perfect remedy. My name's Chad Wilcox, and I pride myself on my self-sufficiency. I can change a tire with my eyes closed and start a fire with nothing but sticks. So when I packed up my RV and set off for the dense woods of the Mark Twain National Forest in Missouri, I felt invincible. It would be a peaceful retreat, a getaway without complications. The drive was uneventful, the road winding through lush greenery, the sun filtering through the thick canopy above. The world felt quieter, cleaner, free from the usual noise. I found a secluded spot beside a crystal-clear creek, perfect for fishing, far enough from any other campers to feel truly isolated. For the first few hours, everything was perfect. I set up camp, built a fire, and grilled a steak. The evening was calm, the air fresh, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional splash of fish in the creek. I cast my line into the cool water, hoping for a catch. I reeled in a couple of trout, big enough to eat, and prepared them for dinner. The silence of the forest was almost deafening in its tranquility, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, that peace shattered. The forest's once soothing symphony was replaced by an eerie silence, as if the very land itself was holding its breath. My instincts, trained by years in the wild, told me something was wrong. I stood still, trying to shake off the feeling, but the hairs on the back of my neck rose. It wasn't just the normal noises of the night. No, something was watching me. I scanned the tree line, but all I saw was darkness. I laughed nervously, attributing it to my nerves. After all, I was just a city guy pretending to be a woodsman. I went back to my campfire, took a swig of my beer, and tried to relax. But then I heard it, a twig snapping in the darkness. I froze, my body tensing. It was followed by another snap and then another, each one closer than the last. My breath caught. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't even the wind. These sounds were deliberate, calculated, footsteps. Gripping my flashlight, I shone the beam into the woods. The light cut through the dark, revealing nothing but shadows and the gnarled trunks of trees. My pulse quickened. I tried to shake off the dread gnawing at me, telling myself it was nothing. But deep down I knew I wasn't alone. The next few hours passed without incident, but the unease never left. Finally, I decided to turn in. I extinguished the fire, double-checked the locks on the RV, and crawled into bed. The silence was overwhelming, and every little noise outside sounded like a threat. It didn't help that my dreams were dark and unsettling, filled with flashes of something watching me, something waiting. A loud bang ripped me from my restless slumber. My heart pounded in my chest, blood rushing in my ears. There was another bang, followed by a scraping sound against the side of the RV. My breath hitched. Something was outside. I grabbed my flashlight, my hunting knife, and crept toward the door, each step louder than the last in the dead of night. My mind raced, spinning possibilities. Bears, thieves, something far worse. I flung the door open, flashlight in hand, heart in my throat. What I saw almost made me collapse. A man stood by the front of my RV, tall and broad-shouldered. His clothes were torn, filthy, and his face was smeared with dirt and blood. In his hand, he gripped a crowbar, which he had apparently been using to try and pry open the door. His eyes, wild and unblinking, locked onto mine. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, my voice shaking, but I tried to sound brave to command the situation. He didn't answer. He didn't even blink. He just stared, blood dripping from his hands, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "Not here to chat," he rasped, his voice guttural and unsettling. He lunged at me. I barely managed to dodge the crowbar as it swung toward my head, but I wasn't fast enough. My knife flashed out, slashing his arm, and he howled in pain. But he didn't retreat. He was impossibly strong, more powerful than any man had a right to be. We fought, the flashlight clattering to the ground, leaving us in near total darkness. His strength was overwhelming, but my desperation kept me going. We struggled, both of us bloodied, our grunts and growls punctuating the night. The fight was brutal, primal, savage. I managed to kick him off me and scrambled to my feet, grabbing the flashlight and shining it on his blood-soaked form. He didn't flinch. This wasn't just some deranged camper. This was something far worse. He charged at me again, but I darted back into the RV, slamming the door behind me. The man hammered against the walls, his breath ragged and animalistic. My mind raced as I grabbed my phone, dialing 911, my hands shaking uncontrollably. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, a stark contrast to the madness outside. There's a man trying to break into my RV, I gasped. He's attacking me. He's insane. Stay on the line, sir. Help is on the way, she assured me, but I could hear the man shouting incoherently, the sound of his fists pounding against the windows. Minutes felt like hours. The banging intensified, a frantic, maddened assault on my sanctuary. I stood in the corner of the RV, my knife raised, ready to defend myself. Then, like a dream, the noise stopped. Footsteps faded into the distance, running away. A moment of eerie silence. The distant wail of sirens brought me back to reality. The police arrived, their lights flashing through the trees. I didn't move until they were at the door. He went that way, I croaked, pointing in the direction the man had fled. The officers scoured the area, but the man was gone, vanished into the dark woods. They found blood, signs of a struggle, but no trace of the madman. They assured me they'd keep searching, but I needed to leave for my safety. I packed my things, my hands still trembling, and fled as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. But the terror didn't fade. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle in the bushes a potential threat. The hours passed in a blur, but my mind never stopped replaying that nightmare. Back home, I tried to return to normal. But every night, I lay awake, listening for those footsteps in the dark, waiting for the inevitable return of the man who wanted me dead. Weeks passed, and I thought I had put it behind me. Then one evening, I found a piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. My heart sank as I unfolded it. Written in crimson ink, the words burned into my mind. "I'll be seeing you soon." My blood ran cold. It wasn't over. The man, the thing in the woods, was still out there. And I knew, deep down, he wasn't done with me. I fortified my home, installed security cameras, got a dog. But every night, as I lay in bed, I listened for those footsteps. The terrifying certainty that he would return, that I was never truly safe, haunted me. And so the uneasy peace continued, with the memories of that night forever etched in my mind, a constant reminder that sometimes the darkness is alive and it's waiting. I never imagined that my weekend camping trip would descend into a nightmare. I'd sought solitude, the kind of peace only Oregon's dense forests could offer, away from the world's noise. My name's Colin Birch, and after all the hardships I've faced, nothing could have prepared me for what happened that day. The RV park was more remote than I anticipated, perched on the edge of the Willamette National Forest, a place that promised seclusion. There were only a handful of other campers, mostly older couples or families with kids. I found a spot by the river, set up my RV, and breathed in the crisp, pine-scented air. I had a few fishing rods, a cooler of beer, and a stack of books. Perfect. At least, that's what I thought. On the second day, I met Stan and Ruby, an elderly couple parked a few spots down. They were friendly, chatting about their travels and offering me some homemade jerky. Stan mentioned seeing some shady characters lingering around the park the night before, but I didn't think much of it at the time. People like to gossip, I figured. He was probably just trying to spice up their otherwise dull camping trip. But something in his eyes, something in his voice made me uneasy. That evening, I decided to go for a hike. The trailhead started near the park entrance, winding its way up into the forest. I left a note on my RV door just in case, and grabbed my phone, a flashlight, and a small knife. Old habits die hard, especially after years of hiking solo. The forest was eerily serene, only the sounds of birds and the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. After about an hour, I stumbled upon an old clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its moss-covered walls sagging under years of neglect. Curious, I approached, pushing open the creaky door. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay, the remnants of someone's forgotten life littering the space, a rusted stove, a broken chair, and scattered papers. As I turned to leave, I heard them, faint voices outside, low and urgent. I froze, heart pounding. I ducked behind the door, peering through a crack. 3 men stood in the clearing, talking in hushed tones. Their rough, unkempt appearances sent a chill down my spine. Dirty clothes, wild hair, an air of menace hanging over them. One of them, a tall, scraggly bearded man, unfolded a map and began pointing at various spots. Another man, stockier with a shaved head, kept glancing nervously around. The third man, the leader, was the one who made my blood run cold. A jagged scar ran down his cheek, and he held something in his hand, a gun. My heart hammered in my chest. I stayed still, praying they wouldn't see me, but my mind was already racing. What the hell were they planning? When they left, I waited for what felt like an eternity before cautiously making my way back to the RV park. My stomach twisted with dread. I had to warn Stan and Ruby and the others, everyone. But when I reached the park, my worst fears were realized. The RV door was wide open. "Stan? Ruby?" I called, my voice trembling. There was no answer. I rushed inside. The place was a mess. Drawers pulled out, belongings tossed carelessly around. Panic clawed at my throat. What had happened? My mind raced with horrifying possibilities. Had they been taken? I sprinted to the park office, hoping to find the manager. But the office was empty. The entire place was silent, like a graveyard. An unsettling dread gnawed at my insides. I checked the other campsites, but most of the other campers were either out hiking or had already left. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. No signal. Of course, my hands shook as I realized how isolated we were, how vulnerable we all were. I ran back to my RV, grabbed my hunting rifle, and headed towards the woods where I'd seen the men. If they were hiding out there, I had to find them. I wouldn't let them hurt anyone else. The forest felt suffocating as I moved through it, every snap of a twig making my nerves scream. After what seemed like hours, I found it. A hidden camp camouflaged in the dense thicket. The men were there, sitting around a small fire. Their voices carried through the still night air, low and conspiratorial. The scarred leader spoke in a gravelly whisper, outlining their plans. A heist at a nearby town. They were waiting for some kind of signal. My heart pounded as I realized how close I was to stopping something terrible. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. But as I turned to leave, disaster struck. I stepped on a dry branch. The loud crack echoed through the forest, and in an instant, the men were on their feet, weapons drawn. "Who's there?" The stocky man shouted, his voice thick with menace. My breath caught in my throat. I bolted, adrenaline surging, my legs screaming in pain as I tore through the underbrush. Shots rang out. Crack! Crack! And one of them found its mark. A sharp pain shot through my leg, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I burst into the clearing near the RV park, my legs pumping despite the burning agony in my leg. In the distance, headlights. I waved frantically, my voice hoarse as I shouted, "Help! They're coming!" The vehicle screeched to a halt, and a man jumped out. Another camper, someone I hadn't seen before. "They're coming!" I screamed again, pointing toward the woods, my words spilling out in a desperate rush. He didn't hesitate. The man took one look at my bleeding leg, nodded grimly, and helped me into his truck. We sped off, the men's shouts fading behind us. He introduced himself as EMT, a recent arrival to the park. He had a satellite phone, and we quickly called the police. They told us to stay put and wait. We made it to a nearby gas station where he helped me clean and bandage my leg. The police arrived not long after, and the rest of the night was a blur of questions and waiting. Eventually, they found Stan and Ruby, tied up but unharmed, locked in the back of their RV. They had been lucky. The police managed to track down the men the next morning. They arrested them before they could carry out their heist. It turns out those men were part of a notorious gang, targeting isolated RV parks and small towns across the state. The scarred leader? A wanted criminal with a rap sheet that spanned multiple states. As for me, I was just relieved it was over. The wound in my leg healed, but the memories of that night, that horror, will stay with me forever. I still go camping, but now I'm more cautious. I never imagined a simple trip into the forest would turn into a real-life nightmare. But it taught me one thing: always be prepared for the unexpected. Because in the woods, you're never truly alone. You wouldn't believe the hell I've gotten myself into. My name's Bart Shell, and I'm about to tell you how what was supposed to be a peaceful getaway turned into a nightmare I never saw coming. It all started when I decided to head out to the Ozarks for some much-needed downtime. Work had been relentless, and the thought of some solitude in nature felt like the only way to clear my head. I packed up my RV with the essentials: food, water, some beers, and my trusty fishing gear, and set off before the sun had fully risen. The drive was peaceful, the kind of serenity I needed. I reached the secluded campsite by noon, an isolated spot by a crystal-clear lake surrounded by dense woods. The silence was perfect. I set up camp, got a fire going, and spent the afternoon fishing. The fish weren't biting, but I didn't mind. The tranquility of the place was enough to make me forget about everything else. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I cooked a simple dinner, cracked open a beer, and sat by the fire. The serenity was almost hypnotic. That's when I heard it, rustling in the bushes. I figured it was a deer or maybe a raccoon. No big deal. But then came something else. Voices. Low, hushed whispers. That was strange. Curiosity crept in, and I grabbed my flashlight, stepping quietly toward the noise. The beam of light revealed two figures, hunched close together, whispering in urgent tones. They didn't notice me at first, but when they did, their eyes locked onto mine, wide with shock. Without a word, they bolted into the darkness, disappearing into the woods. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding. I called out to them, wondering if they were lost or needed help, but they were already gone. I brushed it off as a weird encounter, but something gnawed at me. Still, I returned to the fire, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I went to bed that night more irritated than scared. That was my mistake. The next morning, I woke up to a mess. My fishing gear was scattered around the campsite, and a few of my beers were missing. I cursed under my breath. Those two must have come back and rifled through my things. I was annoyed, but I tried not to let it ruin my trip. I decided to clear my head with a hike around the lake. The woods were thick, and with every step, I felt like I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent shivers down my spine. After a while, I stumbled upon a small, run-down cabin, hidden in the trees. It looked abandoned, but something about it felt off. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. The inside was dark, suffocatingly so, with old, dust-covered furniture strewn about. But what grabbed my attention were the fresh footprints on the floor, leading to the back room. My heart hammered in my chest as I followed them. What I found in that room made my blood run cold. Bloodstains covered the floor and walls, and drag marks led to a trapdoor in the corner. My stomach churned. I couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I finally forced myself to turn and run, but then I heard the voices again. Louder this time. Frantic. I hid behind a tree and watched the two figures from the night before. They were agitated now, talking in hurried whispers about someone named Jake. They said he was supposed to be there by now. I knew I'd seen too much. I needed to get out of there. I rushed back to my RV, throwing my gear together. My pulse raced as I moved quickly, trying to pack up before anything else happened, but then I heard footsteps. My heart stopped. I grabbed the only weapon I had, a hefty fishing knife, and waited. The men emerged from the woods, their faces twisted in malice. The taller one had wild eyes and a scruffy beard. The other was shorter, stocky, and exuded menace. "What do you want?" I shouted, brandishing the knife, my hands trembling. The tall one smirked, stepping closer. "Just here to chat, buddy. You've seen things you shouldn't have." "I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, trying to mask my panic. The shorter one pulled out a gun, pointing it directly at me. "Don't play dumb. We know you were at the cabin. We need to know who else you told." "I didn't tell anyone," I pleaded, my mind racing. "I was just hiking. I won't say anything, I swear." The tall one laughed darkly. "That's what they all say." Before I could react, he lunged at me, but I slashed with the knife, catching his arm. He yelped, but the shorter man was fast, swinging the butt of his gun into my head. My world spun, and I hit the ground hard, the knife slipping from my grasp. They dragged me into the woods, my vision blurring. When I came to, I was tied to a tree, my head throbbing. The two men stood in front of me, arguing in low, frantic voices. I could make out bits and pieces of their conversation, something about a deal gone wrong, about needing to take care of me. Desperation gave me strength. I managed to slip one hand free, and the tall man noticed too late. I grabbed a rock and slammed it into his knee. He howled in pain, collapsing to the ground. The shorter man whipped his gun around, but I was already moving. I tackled him, the gun going off with a deafening bang. We struggled on the ground. His strength was overwhelming, but I was fueled by sheer terror. I grabbed the knife from his belt and drove it into his side. His eyes widened in shock, and then he went limp. Bloodied and bruised, I staggered to my feet. Kurt, the tall man, still writhing on the ground. I grabbed his gun and pointed it at him, my hands shaking. "Who are you?" I demanded. Just following orders," he gasped. "Please, don't kill me." "Why were you at the cabin?" I pressed. "What were you doing there?" He hesitated, then broke. "We're part of a drug ring. The cabin's a drop point. Someone double-crossed us, and now we're cleaning up the mess. You're just some unlucky bastard who saw too much." I called the cops, keeping the gun trained on him until they arrived. The police searched the cabin, finding more bodies and evidence of their crimes. The two men were arrested, and I was left in the aftermath, my RV now a crime scene. I couldn't stop shaking. What was supposed to be a peaceful trip had turned into a brutal, bloody nightmare. The authorities told me I'd be safe, but deep down, I knew better. This kind of mess doesn't just go away. In the end, I packed up and left the Ozarks, that vowing never to return. The memory of that trip haunts me, and every time I see an RV, I'm reminded of the blood, the fear, the randomness of it all. Maybe one day I'll find peace, but for now, I just take it one day at a time. It's strange how the simplest plans can spiral into a nightmare. There I was, Nick Ventura, trying to escape the chaos of life with a peaceful weekend of RV camping in the remote Adirondack Mountains. It was supposed to be just me, my dog Buddy, and a cooler full of cold beers. After a messy breakup, I needed solitude, a retreat from everything to clear my mind. But that day, that place, would become a living nightmare. I arrived at the campsite around midday, a remote stretch of wilderness untouched by the world. The tall pines whispered in the breeze, and the lake shimmered under the late afternoon sun, as if inviting me to relax. Setting up camp was easy. The RV parked, a chair beside the fire pit, and Buddy running free, his joy contagious. His tail wagged like a metronome, and he explored every nook and cranny of our secluded paradise. But then, something changed. It was subtle at first, just a rustling in the bushes that Buddy noticed before I did. At first I dismissed it, a deer maybe, or some small critter. The place was teeming with wildlife. But Buddy's low growl, deep and menacing, was unlike anything I'd heard from him before. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I tried to ignore it. Cracking open a beer, I let the cool liquid settle my nerves, but as dusk fell and the forest came alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, that unease lingered. I roasted marshmallows while Buddy lay contentedly by the fire. That's when I heard it, a distant scream. Not an animal's cry, but the unmistakable scream of a human. I froze. My pulse quickened. It came again, closer. My breath caught in my throat. I grabbed the flashlight, my hand trembling, and called Buddy to my side. We moved cautiously through the underbrush, the forest dense and oppressive. The air seemed heavier, like the trees themselves were watching us. Every step was louder than the last, each snap of a twig seeming to echo into the dark. I felt exposed, vulnerable. We broke into a small clearing and I stopped dead. There, in the beam of my flashlight, was a man. A middle-aged, disheveled man, streaked with dirt and sweat. His eyes were wide with terror, like an animal trapped in a corner. He gasped for breath. "Help! Help me!" His voice cracked. "Who's after you?" I asked, my voice steady, though my insides churned with fear. "Men, bad men, they killed my friends." His words tumbled out in frantic gasps. "We were camping, they tied us up, took everything, then, one by one, they killed us like animals." He collapsed to his knees, his terror raw and palpable. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. Whoever these men were, they weren't just criminals, they were monsters. "We need to get back to the RV," I said, pulling him to his feet, supporting his trembling body as we hurried back through the forest. The darkness seemed to press in around us, closing tighter with each step. Inside the RV, I locked the door and handed him water. His hands shook as he drank, his face pale. "My name's Nick. What's yours?" Jeremy Cole." His voice was shaky, but he took a deep breath, gathering himself. "They're coming for me. They'll find me. You don't understand." "Jeremy, we need to get out of here. Get back to the main road, call the police." "There's no time," he whispered. "They'll be after me." I didn't need convincing. I packed up the essentials, grabbed Buddy, and we hit the road. The RV's tires crunched over gravel as we navigated the narrow forest road, but every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every bump in the road sent my heart racing. I glanced at Jeremy, his eyes wild, darting nervously over his shoulder. Buddy's ears were perked, his senses heightened. The drive back to the main road felt like an eternity. Every creak and groan of the RV added to the tension, the air thick with anticipation. And then, finally, we saw the glow of the highway lights in the distance. Relief washed over me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't safe. Not yet. I pulled onto the paved road, picking up speed, and Jeremy relaxed a little, slumping into the seat. "Thank you. I thought I was dead for sure. Let's just get to town, call the cops, and get this over with," I said, my voice tense. We reached a small town about 20 minutes later. I pulled into a gas station, and Jeremy rushed to the payphone. I kept my eyes peeled from the RV, scanning for anything out of the ordinary. When he returned, his face was a little less strained. "They're sending a unit out. They want us to wait here." I let out a breath. "Good. You hungry?" I asked. There was a diner across the street, its neon sign flickering in the night. We crossed over, Buddy trotting beside us. The diner was quiet, too quiet. Only a few patrons scattered around, nursing late-night cups of coffee. We slid into a booth in the back. I ordered us some food, and as we sat in silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The sense of danger still lingered, like a shadow that wouldn't let go. And then, just as I feared, the door to the diner opened. Two men walked in, rough, their faces hard and cold, like wolves on the hunt. My stomach dropped. Jeremy's face went pale. "That's them," he whispered, his barely audible. My heart pounded in my chest. They had found us. I had to think fast. My mind raced for a plan, something, anything. "Stay calm," I whispered to Jeremy, reaching for my phone, but there was still no signal. I had to do something. I stood up casually, heading toward the restroom. As I passed the waitress, I leaned in. "Can you call the police?" "We're in trouble," I said softly. Her eyes widened, but she nodded and hurried toward the back. I continued toward the restroom, glancing back to see Jeremy slipping out of the booth, heading toward the door with Buddy. The men were closing in. I had to buy him time. As they approached, I blocked their path. "Can I help you fellas?" I asked, trying to sound casual. One of them sneered and shoved me aside. I stumbled, but it was enough. Jeremy was already out the door. I didn't wait. I grabbed a heavy ceramic mug from the nearest table and smashed it over one of their heads. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The other one turned, fury in his eyes. I didn't hesitate. I bolted for the door, heart pounding, legs burning as I sprinted across the parking lot to the RV. Buddy was inside and Jeremy was already in the driver's seat. I jumped in, started the engine, and peeled out of there just as the second man burst through the diner doors. We raced down the highway, my pulse hammering in my ears. The small town disappeared behind us, and we didn't stop until we reached the next county. I found another gas station with a working phone and called the police once more. This time, They sent a patrol car immediately. As we waited, Jeremy and I tried to process what had happened. What were those men after? Why had they come after him? After us? When the police arrived, we told them everything, every detail. They assured us they would investigate, but something gnawed at me. The police took our statements and offered to drive us to a nearby motel. I glanced at Jeremy. What now? Lay low for a while, he said. Maybe head back home to Vermont. This whole trip, it's been a disaster. Yeah, I agreed, but at least you're alive. He nodded, staring out the window, and for the first time I felt a bitter twinge of relief. We checked into our rooms and I collapsed onto the bed, exhausted. Buddy curled up next to me and I let out a long, ragged sigh. It was over, or so I thought. As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, one thought lingered in my mind. What were those men really after? Whatever it was, I hoped it was over. But something told me that this nightmare wasn't finished yet. I didn't come to Palo Duro Canyon looking for ghosts. I came for history. Specifically to uncover the truth about Red Hollow, a forgotten settlement whose name had all but vanished from the record books. What I thought would be a quiet solo trip for research, a chance to gather material for the article I'd promised myself I'd write, soon became a nightmare I wish I'd never ventured into. The locals weren't much help. When I stopped at a small diner near the park entrance, the mere mention of Red Hollow earned me uneasy stares and muttered warnings. Only the waitress, a middle-aged woman with eyes that seemed perpetually shadowed by something, spoke up. Nothing left there but bad memories, she said, sliding me my coffee. You'd do well to leave it alone. I forced a smile. Thanks, but I'll take my chances. But as I turned to leave, her final words lingered, cold and sinister. It watches. By midday, I reached the canyon. The RV rattled along the dirt roads until I found a secluded spot to park. The air was crisp, the sun high, and the canyon sprawled around me like a painted landscape, its jagged red rock formations casting long, deep shadows. But there was something oppressive about the place. The silence was too thick, too suffocating, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I set up camp quickly, eager to start exploring. The trail to Red Hollow wasn't on any official map, but I'd pieced together enough from old newspapers and online forums to know where to look. With my notebook, camera, and water bottle in hand, I set off into the canyon. The hike was more treacherous than I'd imagined. The path, if you could even call it that, was little more than an overgrown, uneven trail that twisted through jagged rocks. Every step felt like an effort, the ground threatening to twist my ankle at any moment. And then there were the whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the words were too distinct, too purposeful, carried on a breeze that sent a cold shiver down my spine. The murmurs weren't loud enough to understand, but they were there. Soft, urgent whispers that stopped the instant I turned to look behind me. By the time I reached Red Hollow, the sun was beginning to set, casting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. The settlement lay in ruins, exactly as I'd imagined, crumbling cabins with weathered wooden walls that seemed to sag under the weight of time. In the center stood a small chapel, its roof bowed under years of neglect. I stepped inside. The wooden floorboards groaned beneath my weight, and the air was cooler, the shadows longer. The walls were covered in strange carvings, names, dates, and phrases that twisted my gut. Stay away. It watches. Run. I was so absorbed by the carvings that I didn't notice the figure standing silently in the corner until I turned around. Jesus! I yelped, nearly dropping my notebook. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. He wore a park ranger's uniform, though it looked as aged as the ruins around us. You're not supposed to be here, he said, his voice low and gravelly. I didn't see any signs, I stammered, trying to steady my breathing. You don't need signs to know some places aren't meant for visitors, he replied. This land has a memory, and it doesn't forget. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked out, vanishing into the growing darkness. Something in my gut told me I shouldn't follow. That night, as I sat by the fire, reviewing my notes, I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up to see a woman in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back into a loose braid. She carried a sketch pad and a lantern, her expression a mix of caution and curiosity. "You're the one asking about Red Hollow, right?" she said. "Depends," I replied. "Are you here to warn me off too?" She smiled faintly. Something like that. Her name was Anna. She was an artist, camping nearby to capture the canyon's beauty, but when I mentioned Red Hollow, her face went pale. "I've never been there," she said, her voice dropping. "But I've dreamt about it. The chapel, the carvings, the thing that lives there. It's like it's been calling to me." "What kind of thing?" I asked, my stomach sinking. She hesitated. "I don't know. But it's not human." The next day, I couldn't stay away. I knew I should have, but the pull of Red Hollow was stronger than my fear. This time, the trail felt different. Longer, more twisted, as though the canyon itself were trying to lead me astray. By the time I reached the settlement, the sky was overcast, the light flat and gray. Inside the chapel, the air was colder, heavier. The carvings on the walls were darker now, deeper, as though they'd been etched just hours ago. I stepped closer to examine them, and that's when I heard it. "Elliot." I froze. The voice was low, familiar, coming from the direction of the altar. It couldn't be Dr. Harper. Dr. Samuel Harper had been my mentor in graduate school. He taught me everything I knew about history and research. He died 10 years ago, a heart attack in his office. Yet here I was, hearing his voice as clear as if he were standing in front of me. "Come closer," the voice beckoned, and before I could stop myself, my legs moved of their own accord. At the altar, I found an old journal, its leather cover cracked and brittle. I opened it. The handwriting inside was neat, precise. Dr. Harper's handwriting. As I read, the room seemed to darken, the shadows stretching and twisting around me. The journal spoke of the settlers' final days, how they turned on one another, driven mad by whispers and visions. And then came the last entry. "It watches. It waits. It wants us all." A cold wind rushed through the chapel, extinguishing my light. I turned, and there it was, the specter. It stood in the doorway, tall and pale, its face smooth and featureless, a presence so oppressive I could barely breathe. It didn't move, but the air around it seemed to ripple, pulling me toward it. "Elliot," the voice came again. But this time, it wasn't Dr. Harper. It was my own voice, distorted and wrong. I stumbled back, dropping the journal, and bolted from the chapel. The settlement was unrecognizable now. The cabins leaned at impossible angles, the sky swirling into a mass of black clouds. I ran, blindly, but the specter's whispers were closing in, louder and louder. "You can't leave," it said. "You belong to the canyon now." When I finally burst into the clearing where my RV was parked, I found Anna waiting for me, her face drawn and pale. "You saw it, didn't you?" she said. "It's real," I gasped. "It's all real. You have to let it go," she said, stepping closer. "Whatever it's using against you, your guilt, your regrets, you have to let it go. That's how it traps you." Her words echoed in my head as I stumbled into the RV. My notebook was still on the table, filled with my research, my sketches, all the things I had clung to in an effort to prove myself. With shaking hands, I threw it into the fire pit outside. The flames roared to life, burning brighter and hotter than they should have been. The whispers turned to screams. The world seemed to tilt, the ground buckling beneath me, and then it was over. The next morning, the canyon was quiet again. Anna was gone. Her campsite was empty, but she had left behind a sketch, a haunting image of the chapel, with the specter standing in the doorway. I packed up quickly and left, the memories of Red Hollow already fading like a fading dream. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw it. A pale figure standing at the edge of the road, watching me go. Ever wonder why a guy like me, a man broken by the weight of things too horrible to say, would choose to camp alone in the backwoods of Montana? Yeah, I didn't either. But there I was, parked in the middle of nowhere, trying to outrun the ashes of my life. No job, no future, no one left to tear me apart but myself, and an old RV that wheezed like a dying animal every time I dared to start it. Trent Milner. Not that it matters. You won't find anything about me online. Just another ghost fading quietly into the background. But what happened to me that night? That's the story. The woods were suffocating. An endless stretch of trees and shadows where the air felt thick with something ancient, something that wasn't quite right. The silence was crushing, alive in a way that made my skin crawl. I thought the solitude would be a balm for my soul, but that was a lie. Solitude, it turns out, is just a breeding ground for madness. I set up camp, cracked open a beer, and tried to swallow my misery with the bitter cold taste of it. For a heartbeat, I thought I might find peace. And then the stench hit. It was sharp, metallic, wrong. At first, I blamed the RV's plumbing. It had that old, rusted smell like a forgotten grave. But it didn't fade. It grew, creeping through the air like something alive, something hungry. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands shaking, and stumbled into the woods. Each step felt heavier, the underbrush clawing at my boots as if the forest itself was trying to hold me back. But I couldn't turn around. Not yet. The smell pulled me deeper until it led me to the horror I wasn't ready for. A body, or what was left of one. Shredded flesh, broken bones. Blood, so much it pooled beneath a heap of leaves, turning the earth black. My stomach heaved, and I felt the world slip away, but I couldn't look away. This wasn't human. It couldn't be. And then, from the shadows, came the sound. A rustling, like something dragging its bones across the earth. I froze. My flashlight flickered, its beam jerking wildly as my heart pounded in my chest. And then I saw him. A man, or something that looked like a man, stepped into the light, his massive frame towering over me. His face was weathered, carved by years of torment. His eyes, though, they were hollow, empty, as though they'd witnessed things that should never be seen. In his hand, he held a long, jagged knife, its edge gleaming sickly in the dim light. Lost? His voice was a low, gravelly growl that sent a chill down my spine. I swallowed, my throat tight. Just camping nearby, I lied, my voice trembling, barely above a whisper. Thought I'd take a walk. He stepped closer, his breath sour with decay. You shouldn't be here. Before I could react, he lunged, the blade slicing through the air, missing me by inches. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I ran. I ran like I was being hunted, because I was. The branches tore at my skin, the earth seemed to rise up against me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I burst into the clearing and dove into the RV, slamming the door behind me. I locked it. My breath came in short gasps, my pulse drumming in my ears. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. But then, the handle rattled. I froze. Clutching the kitchen knife I'd grabbed in a blind panic, I waited. My heart felt like it might burst from my chest. The rattling stopped. Footsteps retreated into the night. But I knew it wasn't over. I didn't sleep. Not that night. Not ever again. At dawn, I left. I drove straight to the nearest town, a dying place where people didn't ask questions. The diner smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Maggie, the waitress, eyed me with suspicion at first, but I saw the flicker of recognition when I tipped her well. Her eyes sharpened. "You're not the first to ask about the woods," she said, leaning in. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "People go missing out there. The sheriff says it's just folks getting lost, but we know better." I took a breath. "Ever heard of a tall guy with a knife?" Her face went pale. "Jed," she whispered, like saying his name might summon him. "Used to be a logger. Then something happened. Lost his mind. Lives out there now. No one's ever caught him. Too many places to hide." I should have left. I should have packed up and driven far, far away. But something inside me snapped. I had to know. I went back into the woods, this time armed with a map, a compass, and a resolve that was quickly fading. Hours later, I found it. His camp. A rotting shack surrounded by the stench of death. Inside, it was a shrine to madness. Blood-stained carvings on the walls, a grotesque altar in the corner, and the overpowering smell of decay. It felt like the place had been alive once, but now it was only a tomb. "Looking for me?" His voice shattered the air. My blood turned to ice. I spun around, but he was already on me. His hands were iron, his grip like steel, and his breath was rancid, like death itself. He slammed me against the wall, knocking the wind out of me. His knife gleamed in the dim light, and his lips curled into a sadistic grin. "You should have stayed away," he growled, dragging me toward the altar. I struggled, but I knew it was pointless. This was it, my death, my nameless, forgotten death in the middle of nowhere. But then, the crack of a branch split the air like thunder. Jed crumpled to the ground, unconscious, his knife slipping from his grasp. Behind him stood Maggie, a heavy branch in her hands, a grim smile on her face. "Figured you'd do something stupid," she said, her voice almost affectionate. We tied him up and called the sheriff. This time, there was no escape. As I drove away from Montana, the weight of the woods pressed down on me. I could feel them watching me. The trees, the earth, the shadows, they knew my name now. And sometimes in the dead of night, when the silence stretches too long, I swear I can still smell the blood. My name is Comrade Thorne, and the events I am about to describe are so far removed from anything I could have ever imagined that I sometimes wonder if they really happened at all, or if the madness I felt during those days was just an elaborate illusion. It all began in the fall of 2011, a time when my life was as ordinary as it could be. A tech guy, working in Seattle, fixing computers, setting up networks, and maintaining a steady routine. I lived alone in a small apartment, spent my weekends hiking the nearby forests to clear my mind, and kept a few close friends. My life wasn't thrilling, but it was safe. Then came Elliot, always the restless one, with a charisma that could make anyone follow him anywhere. We'd known each other since college. When he called me one Friday morning, urging me to join him for a weekend at his family's old cabin near Mount Rainier, I didn't hesitate. He promised a couple of days away from the grind, a little fishing, maybe some beers by the fire. The idea sounded harmless enough, a simple escape. The drive was long, 2 hours of empty road, but filled with banter. Elliot's tales from his paramedic days, mixing dark humor with absurdity, made me laugh until my ribs ached. But the farther we went from civilization, the quieter it became. Eventually, we turned off the main road and onto a narrow, winding dirt path. The trees closed in around us, the sky swallowed whole by a canopy of dark leaves. The cabin was old, built by Elliot's grandfather long ago, far from modern luxuries. No electricity, no plumbing, just the sharp scent of wood and earth. It sat on a small hill overlooking a pristine lake. Quiet, solitary, perfect. We unpacked, cracked open a couple of beers, and after a bit of settling in, decided to explore the surrounding woods before nightfall. The first day passed without incident. We hiked, fished, and drank our fill. The woods whispered with the sounds of crickets and distant owls, the fire crackling as we laughed at old stories. The world felt untouched, like we were the last two people alive in some forgotten corner of the earth. But it was the second day that changed everything. Elliot had mentioned a mine he'd stumbled upon years ago, a relic of some bygone era, and he insisted on showing me. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We packed sandwiches and set off. The air was crisp, sharp with the scent of pine and earth, and the hike was more taxing than I had anticipated, but the forest was breathtaking, majestic even. When we reached the mine, I immediately felt a shift in the air. The entrance was a gaping hole in the hillside, swallowed by overgrowth. The darkness inside seemed to pulse, a deep, unnatural void that I couldn't ignore. But Elliot, ever the adventurer, was already moving toward it, eager to explore. I hesitated. Something in my gut twisted with unease, but I followed him in. The tunnel was narrow, claustrophobic. The air was damp and thick, carrying a smell of old iron and rust. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, but it was impossible to see very far ahead. The sound of our footsteps was muffled, and the silence oppressive. We walked for what felt like an eternity, until the tunnel opened up into a vast cavern. The walls gleamed with moisture, as if the very rock itself was sweating. In the center of the cavern lay a rusted minecart, its metal twisted with age. Elliot immediately rushed to examine it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were no longer alone. My flashlight swept the cavern, and that's when I saw it. Half buried under a pile of rubble, a human skeleton. My heart slammed into my chest. I froze. The bones were old, decades maybe, but they were unmistakably human, covered in grime, their fragile structure resting beneath the jagged rocks like some forgotten relic. Elliot, I called, my voice thick, shaking with a primal fear I couldn't explain. He came over, his face going pale as he saw what I was looking at. "Holy crap," he muttered under his breath. "What the hell happened here?" I shrugged, my mind already spinning with possibilities. "Maybe a cave-in. This place is ancient. We should get out of here." But before we could turn back, we heard it, a rustling sound, faint at first, but unmistakable. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the sound of rocks shifting. It was something, alive. The noise grew louder, closer. We exchanged looks, and I could see the fear in Elliot's eyes. Real fear. The kind that only comes when you know you're not alone. "We need to go," I said, my voice tight with panic. We turned, but the sound followed us, something moving, something large, its movements deliberate. We hurried back toward the entrance, the beam from my flashlight trembling with each step. Then Elliot tripped. His flashlight tumbled from his grasp and clattered against the stone floor. As I reached to help him up, I saw it. At the far end of the cavern, standing just beyond the reach of our flashlights, was a figure. Tall, hunched, its limbs unnaturally long. The head, too big for its body, was turned toward us, eyes glowing like burning embers in the darkness. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed Elliot's arm, and we bolted. The thing's footsteps echoed behind us, getting louder, closer. We ran, gasping for breath, the tunnel twisting around us like some dark, suffocating maze. Finally, we reached the entrance, bursting out into the daylight, but we didn't stop. We didn't even slow down. We ran all the way back to the cabin, hearts pounding, breath coming in ragged gasps. We locked the doors, bolted the windows, and sat in silence, not daring to speak. "What the hell was that?" Elliot finally whispered, his voice cracked, shaking. I didn't know how to answer him. I didn't even want to think about it. "We need to leave," I said, my voice hollow. We grabbed our things in a frantic rush, my hands trembling as I fumbled with my gear. The Jeep never seemed so far away, the forest so suffocating. As we sped down the narrow road, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that thing chasing us. But the road remained empty. The forest, silent. We didn't stop until we were back in Seattle. We went straight to the police, telling them everything. They listened. They were patient, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Who would believe such a story? Days later, we got a call. The police had sent a team to the mine, but there was no trace of the skeleton, no sign of the creature we had described. The cavern was empty, the tunnel undisturbed. It was as if we had imagined the whole thing. But we hadn't. Elliot and I tried to go on with our lives, but neither of us was the same. Nightmares plagued us, keeping us awake in the dark hours of the night. The fear never fully faded, and eventually we drifted apart. Elliot moved to another city, and I buried myself in work, trying to forget. But I couldn't. Years later, I still think about that day. I wonder what we stumbled upon, what we saw or didn't see. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear noises. Soft, distant, like the echo of footsteps in the dark. A rustling, just out of reach. And I wonder if that thing is still out there, waiting, watching. Some things are better left unexplored. Some places are better left forgotten. But the forest never forgets. Have you ever felt the suffocating weight of solitude in the wilderness, surrounded by nothing but the cold embrace of trees and the relentless silence of the deep woods? That's my life as a park ranger at Shale Mountain National Park. It's not for everyone, but it's what I signed up for, and frankly, I thrive on it. I'm Donnie Ratcliffe, born and raised in a sleepy town where trouble always seemed to find me. Nature, however, found me first, and I've been here, miles from civilization, maintaining the park's pristine beauty and keeping the visitors safe. Last week started like any other, or so I thought. I was making my rounds, checking trails, ensuring the paths were clear, the signs visible, and that nothing was out of place. The park, however, felt off. Too quiet. Not a single hiker or camper in sight, which was unusual for this time of year. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long, creeping shadows through the dense trees when my radio crackled to life. It was Sam, my fellow ranger. "Donnie, you there? We've got a report of a missing camper. Name's Trevor Hartman, mid-30s. Came in 2 days ago, hasn't been seen since." "Great, just what I needed." I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the coordinates Sam gave me. Missing campers weren't unheard of, but they usually showed up within a day. This guy had been gone for 2. My pulse quickened. The forest closed in around me as I hiked deeper, the darkness swallowing the trail behind me. The silence was oppressive, almost as if the woods were holding its breath. I kept moving, the only sound the crunch of my boots against the forest floor. Then I found it, Trevor's campsite, or rather, what was left of it. The tent was shred as if something had torn through it with brutal force, and his gear lay scattered in the dirt like someone had tossed it aside carelessly. No sign of Trevor. I called Sam, my voice tight. "Sam, I'm at the campsite. It's a mess. No sign of the guy." "Stay put, Donnie. I'm sending backup." I didn't wait. My gut told me something was wrong. Deeply, horribly wrong. As I scanned the area with my flashlight, I noticed something. Blood. A trail leading off into the trees, dark and thick against the dirt. I followed it, my heart pounding in my chest. The air grew colder with each step, then a noise, a low, guttural snarl that sent a jolt of ice down my spine. My flashlight flickered. I whipped it around, expecting to see an animal. Nothing. Just shadows dancing in the trees. I pressed on, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, but I couldn't. I had to know what had happened to Trevor. And then I found him, or what was left of him. His body, Jesus. It was torn to pieces. His limbs were bent at unnatural angles, his face frozen in a mask of terror. The sight was beyond anything I'd ever imagined. It wasn't the work of any animal I knew. This was something bigger, something wrong. "Sam," I whispered into the radio, my voice barely a breath. "You need to get here now." "We're on our way, Donnie. Hold tight." I didn't have time to hold tight. I was alone, and I knew it. Something was out there. Something that had ripped Trevor apart. Something that wasn't human. And then I heard it again. The snarl. Closer this time. I spun around, flashlight in hand, and that's when I saw it. A figure looming at the edge of the trees. It was massive, standing on two legs, its fur matted and soaked with something dark, maybe blood. Its eyes glowed in the dark, hungry and primal, and its teeth. Those teeth. Jagged, stained with something red and thick. It took a step forward and I could hear the leaves crunch beneath its weight. I panicked. I didn't even think. I ran. My legs burned as I sprinted through the trees and heart hammering in my chest, but I could hear it behind me. The sound of its footsteps crashing through the underbrush. It was fast, too fast. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pushed myself harder, the lights from the ranger station gleaming ahead like a distant beacon. I burst through the door, slamming it behind me. Sam and the backup team were just pulling up, their faces filled with confusion and concern. I must have looked like a madman, sweat-soaked, eyes wide with terror. "Donnie, what the hell happened?" Sam demanded, rushing toward me. "Something out there," I panted. "Something that killed Trevor. It's not an animal, Sam. It's something else. Something worse." We armed ourselves with what we had, flashlights, flares, and the few remaining sidearms in the station, and headed back out. The night was unnaturally quiet, every snap of a twig making my skin crawl. When we reached Trevor's body, it was just as I had left it, but the creature was gone. The ground was torn up, and deep claw marks marred the trees, like something had carved its way through the forest with a fury I couldn't comprehend. Sam swore under his breath. "We need to get this reported. The park's got to be closed. This is way beyond what we can handle." We made our way back to the station in silence, but the oppressive feeling of being watched never left. Every rustle of leaves felt like eyes boring into the back of my skull. The next day, a team from the Wildlife Service arrived. They scouted the area, found the tracks, took samples, but they didn't find the creature. It was as if it had vanished, leaving behind only terror. They closed off that section of the park, labeled it a restricted area, and warned us to stay quiet about what had happened. Officially, Trevor's death was attributed to an animal attack, but those of us who were there knew the truth. The tracks, the claw marks, the savagery of the attack. This wasn't any animal we knew. The park reopened a few weeks later with new rules and stricter warnings, but nothing would ever feel the same. Every time I go on patrol now, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sends a shiver down my spine. I can still see Trevor's face, frozen in terror, and I remember the creature, something that lurks in the darkness of Shale Mountain. It watches, it waits. And I know that one day, it will come again. Another day, another patrol. But I'll never forget what happened in those woods. The forest has its secrets. Some of them are better left undiscovered. My name is Gilbert Hutchinson. This happened to me on October 14th, 2003. I've been driving trucks for over 20 years, crisscrossing this country, hauling everything from produce to machinery. You get to know the roads, the diners, the quiet hideaways where you can rest without anyone bothering you. But this night, in the dead of Northern California, something broke that rhythm. Something that would haunt me forever. I was hauling timber from Oregon to California, taking the long way down through some isolated stretches of Highway 96. It was late afternoon when my truck started acting up, sputtering and groaning like something was wrong under the hood. I knew I had to pull over before I became stranded in the middle of nowhere. Ahead, I saw the rest area sign. It wasn't much, just a small clearing with a couple of picnic tables and a rundown bathroom. But it was all I had. I swung my rig off the road, cut the engine, and got out. The place was deserted, not unusual for these off-the-beaten-path spots. I popped the hood and started checking the engine. It was running hot, but nothing seemed visibly wrong. I stood there, frustrated, wiping the sweat from my brow, when I noticed something out of place. Off in the distance, parked at an odd angle, was an old beat-up pickup truck. I hadn't seen it when I pulled in, but now there it was, covered in dust like it hadn't moved in years. Curiosity gnawed at me. I walked over, stepping carefully, not sure why it unsettled me so much. The truck was empty, the driver's door ajar. Inside, it was a mess. Crumpled beer cans, a worn-out seat, nothing special, but something about it felt wrong. My gut told me to leave, but I turned back towards my truck anyway. Halfway there, I heard a sound. A faint noise, like a muffled groan or a cry. I stopped. It came again, clearer, more desperate. A person. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Against every instinct to get in my truck and drive away, something compelled me to investigate. Slowly, I moved towards the restroom, every step filled with dread. The sound grew louder. It was unmistakable now. A man, begging for help. I reached the restroom and pushed the door open. The smell hit me first, a mix of stale urine and something far worse. Something metallic. I stepped inside, my breath catching in my throat. There he was. A man, bloody and bruised, tied up on the floor. His eyes locked onto mine, wide, frantic, full of terror. "Hang on," I gasped, rushing over to him. My hands shook as I fumbled with the ropes, trying to free him. Who could do something like this? The question tore through my mind, but I didn't have time for it. Finally, the knots came loose and I ripped the gag from his mouth. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse, broken. "He's still out there. We need to go, now." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed him under the arms, helping him to his feet. We stumbled out of the restroom into the dying light of day, and I scanned the area. It was still empty, but the silence felt unnatural, like something was waiting. "What happened?" I asked as we hurried towards my rig. "He attacked me," the man said, wincing with each step. "Some crazy guy took my wallet, my truck. I thought he was going to kill me." We reached my rig and I helped him into the passenger seat. But as I slid into the driver's seat, I saw it. Movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone was coming out of the woods, heading straight for us. I didn't wait to see who it was. I slammed the engine to life, and I tore out of there like a man running from the devil himself. For a long while, neither of us said a word. The road stretched out before us, dark and endless. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see that old dusty pickup truck following us, but the road stayed empty, just the headlights cutting through the darkness. Finally, the man spoke, his voice still shaking. "Dennis," he said. "Dennis Carril, thank you for saving my life." "Gilbert Hutchinson," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "You're welcome. But what the hell happened?" Dennis took a deep breath, his voice trembling as he spoke. "I was driving home from Weka, took a wrong turn, ended up at that rest stop. Next thing I know, this guy comes out of nowhere, knocked me out cold. I woke up tied up in there." He paused, his face pale. "He said he was going to come back for me." A chill ran down my spine. I swallowed hard. "Did you get a good look at him?" Dennis shook his head. "Not really. It was dark, and he had a hood on. But he was big, strong, definitely not someone you want to mess with." We drove on for another hour until we found a gas station. I told Dennis to stay put while I called the cops. I stepped out of the truck, my nerves on edge, and my eyes fell on the bulletin board at the station. Missing person posters. One of them, a woman in her mid-30s, was last seen in the same area where I had found Dennis. I got through to the local sheriff's office and told them everything. They promised to send someone out, but it didn't feel like enough. I returned to my truck, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled deep in my chest. Dennis was still shaken, but seemed better. I tried to lighten the mood. "Well, at least you'll have one hell of a story to tell." Dennis managed a weak smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, I guess. Just wish it didn't come with a concussion." We both laughed, but it was that nervous, hollow kind of laugh. The kind you make when you're too scared to admit how close you came to death. The sheriff's car finally pulled up. 2 deputies got out and approached us. One of them called Dennis's name, and they led him away to get checked out at the hospital. I gave my statement, and they asked if I had noticed anything unusual about the attacker, but I couldn't tell them much more than what I already had. As I sat back in my rig, I tried to process everything. It felt like a nightmare, like some twisted story I'd heard, but it was real. A couple of weeks later, I got a call from the sheriff's office. They'd found Dennis's pickup truck abandoned in a field, not far from where I had picked him up. No sign of the attacker, no clues. The investigation hit a dead end. "Do you think he's still out there?" I asked. "Hard to say," the deputy replied. "We'll keep looking, but sometimes these guys just disappear." I hung up, feeling both relieved and frustrated. I wanted answers, I wanted closure, but sometimes in this world you don't get that. A year later, I found myself back on that same route, hauling a load of furniture. I passed the rest area and something in me told me to pull over. I couldn't help it. The place was just as I remembered it. Empty. Silent. I got out and walked around, half expecting to find something, anything, that would explain what had happened. But there was nothing. Just an abandoned parking lot and the faint rustling of the trees. I stood there for a moment, letting the memories wash over me, then got back in my truck and drove away, leaving the past behind me. But sometimes I wonder about Dennis. I wonder if he's okay. We never stayed in touch. And as for the man who attacked him, who knows, maybe he's still out there, waiting in the shadows, or maybe he's already moved on to someone else. All I know is this: life on the road is unpredictable. You see things, experience things that most people never will. And the only thing I've learned is to trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. So, if you ever find yourself on those lonely highways, just remember this. Keep your eyes open, keep your wits about you, and if you get into trouble, just hope someone like me is around to lend a hand. I had always longed for an escape from the grinding chaos of city life. The constant roar of engines, the shrill honking horns, the oppressive crush of humanity. It wore me down to my very bones. So I scraped together the last of my savings, bought a dilapidated RV, and set my sights on the dark forests of northern Idaho. Not a tourist paradise, but that's exactly what I wanted. Solitude, silence, and the crushing isolation of the wilderness. My name is Raymond Keats. A mechanic by trade, I've spent most of my life lost in the hum of engines, fixing machines and drowning out the monotony with cheap beer. I've always been the quiet one, the loner. My few friends say I've got a certain darkness about me. Out here, though, the quiet wasn't just peaceful, it was suffocating. It pressed down on me, making everything feel heavier, like the forest itself was watching me, waiting for something. I found the perfect campsite, miles away from anyone. The trees weren't just tall, they were ancient, their trunks gnarled and twisted, stretching skyward like the hands of forgotten giants. The air was thick with the musty scent of decay, and the ground beneath me seemed to pulse with life, as if the earth itself had a heartbeat. No other campers, no signs of human life, just me and the forest. The first day felt perfect. I parked by a stream that gurgled quietly in the stillness, built a small fire, and roasted sausages while the world around me hummed with the strange rhythm of the wild. By the time the stars appeared, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me, like I had finally found the refuge I'd been seeking. That night, I crawled into the cramped RV, tucked under the blankets, and let the sounds of the forest lull me into sleep. Then it began. At first, it was a soft scraping, barely audible, just a faint noise that could have been the wind pushing against the RV. But then I remembered. The trees weren't close enough. Something was wrong. The noise came again, this time louder, more deliberate, like something heavy dragging itself across the gravel. My heart hammered in my chest. I should have stayed inside. I should have locked the door, sealed myself in, and never looked back. But something inside me, some primal curiosity, got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, and stepped outside into the thickening fog. The world had changed. A dense, suffocating mist had rolled in, wrapping everything in its cold, clammy grip. The beam from my flashlight barely cut through it. The forest was silent, too silent, and that scraping sound had stopped. All that remained was an eerie stillness, as if the very air was holding its breath. Then I saw them, grooves in the earth, long and wide, stretching in a circle around the RV. Something had been dragged, but there were no footprints, no tire tracks, just those unnatural, jagged marks. My stomach twisted, my blood ran cold. I didn't stay outside another second. I rushed back inside, slamming the door shut behind me, my mind racing with what it could have been. Just an animal, I told myself. Just an animal, right? But sleep didn't come that night. The next morning, I woke to a foul, sickening stench that clung to the air like a rotten corpse. I stumbled outside, my stomach churning, and found the source. A mutilated deer carcass, torn apart with a violence that made my blood run cold. The flesh was fresh, still glistening with blood, but there were no scavengers, no birds, no flies. Just an unsettling silence that pressed in on me from all sides. I should have left then. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I didn't. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the foolish pride of a man too proud to admit fear. But I stayed. That was my second mistake. That night, the noises returned, more terrible than before. Footsteps, slow, heavy, and deliberate, circling the RV. But there was something else, too. Something worse. A rasping, labored breathing that sounded wrong, too deep, too unnatural. It wasn't the breath of an animal. It was something larger, something more monstrous. Then came the pounding. Something slammed into the side of the RV, hard enough to rattle the entire vehicle. The walls shuddered with each blow, and the metallic groan of the RV echoing in the night. Again, and again. I held my breath, staring through the fogged window, praying it would stop. That's when I saw it. It was a thing. A creature like nothing I had ever seen, something straight from the depths of a nightmare. Nearly 8 feet tall, its body was twisted and emaciated, covered in patches of wiry fur that clung to its frame like it was trying to hold itself together. Its limbs were long and unnaturally thin, joints bending in angles that should have been impossible. But it was the head that froze me in place. A grotesque mockery of a wolf's skull, tusks jutting from its mouth like broken daggers. Its eyes, or where eyes should have been, were empty, dark voids that seemed to look right through me. It didn't attack. It didn't charge. It just circled, scraping its claws against the RV's metal, its breath rattling like it was struggling to drag air through broken lungs. Then, without a sound, it stopped, its figure standing motionless in the fog, staring at me, not looking, sensing. My blood turned to ice. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but my body wouldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Without warning, the creature bolted into the fog, vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. And with it, the oppressive silence returned, pressing in from every direction. My mind raced, but my body was paralyzed, frozen in terror. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. When morning finally arrived, I didn't wait. I packed up my things in a frenzy, desperate to escape the forest, to flee from whatever had been stalking me. I didn't even glance in the rearview mirror as I drove away, my hands trembling on the wheel. I haven't told anyone what happened. Who would believe me? A mechanic, a quiet loner, talking about a monster in the woods. They'd laugh, dismiss me as delusional, maybe even tell me I was just drunk or seeing things. But I know what I saw. And sometimes when the night is still and the wind howls, I can feel it, waiting, lurking just beyond the reach of the light, hiding in the fog. Watching. Hunting. I will never go back to find out. And no matter what, I will never forget what I saw. I didn't want to go. Let's start there. Tyler, my younger brother, has this uncanny ability to drag me into the kinds of misadventures that haunt you long after they've ended. Ill-planned, reckless, and doomed from the start. But he was excited, and I hadn't spent much time with him lately. So when he pitched this trip to Acadia National Forest, I had a hard time saying no. His voice buzzed through the phone, high-pitched with excitement. Come on, Rachel! Whiteside Mountain has history, Cherokee legends, spirits, shadow people, voices in the trees. You love creepy stuff, right? What I love is binge-watching creepy movies in the safety of my apartment, not trudging through some ancient forest searching for the very things that terrorize me on screen. But Tyler knows how to get under my skin. And here I was, cramped in a rickety old RV with my best friend Lisa, Tyler, and his quiet friend Milo, heading straight into the most isolated corner of the forest. We arrived at dusk and set up camp in a small clearing, nestled in the shadow of Whiteside Mountain. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of pine. Tyler was practically glowing, unloading gear and cracking jokes like he was on a summer vacation. Milo, who hardly spoke, busied himself with his camera, pointing it aimlessly at the treetops like he was hoping Bigfoot might wander by. "This place has vibes," Lisa muttered, eyeing the forest suspiciously. "What kind of vibes?" I asked, trying to keep the nerves at bay. "The kind you don't want to feel after dark," she replied, folding her arms tightly across her chest. "Perfect." Tyler grinned. "That's exactly why we're here." The trouble began almost immediately. Tyler hadn't checked the gear before we left, so when we tried to set up the tent, we found 2 broken poles. Rain clouds rolled in, and Lisa didn't hold back. "Of course," she snapped, glaring at him. "Tyler strikes again." "It's fine," he laughed it off. "It's an adventure." We jury-rigged the tent the best we could, but when the rain came down, the flimsy tarp caved, soaking everything. I retreated to the RV, which wasn't much better. It was small, cramped, the air thick with tension. "You knew it was going to rain, right?" Lisa asked, staring daggers at Tyler. "It's fine. We're fine," Tyler insisted. The rain eased after midnight, leaving the forest unnaturally silent. Lisa and I tried drying our soaked sleeping bags by the fire when she suddenly froze, her face draining of color. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I listened, straining for any sound. Nothing, not even the usual buzz of insects. "What?" I asked. "Whispers," she breathed, her voice barely audible. A cold shiver ran down my spine. "It's just the wind," I said, though I didn't believe it. "No," Lisa said, her gaze fixed on the dark forest, her voice shaking. "Someone's out there." The next morning, Milo reviewed the footage from the previous night. His finger trembled as he pointed at the screen. "Look." We crowded around his camera, watching the footage of the campsite. Shadows flickered at the edge of the trees, unnatural, moving independently of the wind. No one had been out there. "It's probably just the firelight," Tyler said, trying to brush it off, but Milo shook his head, his face pale. "No, look again, Ty. It's not the fire." The shadows shifted too quickly, too fluidly, Lisa groaned. "Great, shadow people." "I don't want to hear it," Tyler snapped, his tone tense. "Just drop it, okay?" That night, things got worse. The usual sounds of life in the woods, the rustle of leaves, the distant chirp of birds vanished completely. The forest was unnervingly still. We sat around the fire in heavy silence, each of us waiting for something to break the tension. Lisa spoke first. "Did anyone else have weird dreams last night?" Tyler raised an eyebrow. "Weird how?" "I saw a figure. No face. Just standing by the fire," she explained, her voice tight. "I thought I was awake, but..." "I had the same dream," Milo whispered, shivering. My stomach lurched. "Me too," Tyler scoffed. "It's just the power of suggestion." Lisa shot him a glare. "Then explain this." She pulled up her sleeve to reveal 3 thin red scratches running down her arm, deep enough to make me flinch. The point of no return had arrived. The next day, Tyler went off alone to gather firewood. He took longer than usual, and when he finally returned, his face was ashen. "Where were you?" I demanded. "I don't know," he mumbled, looking at the ground. "I thought I heard you, Rachel, calling me. I followed it, but I got turned around." "What do you mean, my voice?" I asked, feeling the hairs on my neck stand up. Tyler's eyes were wide, terrified. "I swear it sounded like you. But it wasn't you." That night, everything spiraled. We made the decision to pack up and leave at first light, but the forest had other plans. As darkness descended, the whispers came back, louder, closer. The sound of distant laughter echoed, and Milo tried to film it, but his camera malfunctioned, static filling the screen. "Stop messing with it," Lisa hissed, her voice trembling. "I'm not," Milo said, his voice tight with fear. "It's just static." We huddled together inside the RV, but even there, we couldn't escape the sense that something was wrong. The walls felt too thin, the windows too exposed. Then came the knocking. Soft, deliberate. "Knock, knock. Get away from the window," I shouted as Tyler rushed to check outside. "There's no one out there," he said, his voice shaking. But then the knocking moved, first to the door, then to the back of the RV. It circled us. Milo pointed at his camera. "It's recording," he said, his voice strained. The screen flickered, then showed nothing, just static. But slowly, a figure emerged from the chaos. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long limbs that seemed to bend in ways no human body should. Its face was smooth, featureless, but its presence radiated malice. It was standing just outside the RV, watching us. "Turn it off," Lisa whispered, barely able to speak. By dawn, the forest was silent again. Too silent. We left everything behind, our gear, the fire pit, the RV. We just walked. No one chased us, but we could feel something watching, lurking in the shadows, waiting. When we finally stumbled onto the main road, I couldn't help myself. I looked back, just once. The figure stood at the edge of the trees, its glowing eyes locked on us as we left. We never spoke of that trip again. Lisa refuses to go camping, and Tyler pretends it didn't happen. Milo uploaded the corrupted footage to his YouTube channel. It went viral, of course. And in the final frame, you can see it. Its glowing eyes watching us from the trees. I don't camp anymore. The cabin in the woods. My name is Leonard Eart. What happened to me in 2003 still haunts me to this day. I had just turned 40, and my life had become a nightmare. My wife had left me for a man she met at her yoga class. I was laid off from my job as a software engineer. Then, as if fate wasn't finished, my mother passed away. She left me her cabin, an old, decrepit structure in the Oregon woods. It wasn't much, but it was a sanctuary, or so I thought. In a desperate attempt to escape my shattered life, I packed my old Chevy Suburban and drove to the cabin, hoping the isolation would offer some solace. The winding roads leading to Crater Lake National Park twisted like the thoughts in my mind. The memories of my childhood there flooded back. Long summer days spent fishing, hiking, and listening to my mother speak of the healing power of the woods. I had no idea back then that those woods would become a place of nightmares. The cabin was just as I remembered, weathered but sturdy, standing on the edge of the dense, dark forest. The moment I stepped inside, a heavy, musty smell filled my lungs. Pine, old books, the scent of memories long buried. I unloaded my things, settled in, and tried to clear my mind. The first few days passed in a strange calm. I spent time fishing, chopping wood, and reading, reveling in the peace I hadn't known for months. It was a false peace, though. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows through the trees, I decided to take a walk. The woods felt different now, darker, almost oppressive. The familiar path I used to take with my father felt suffocating. It was quiet, too quiet. The occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird were the only sounds. Then I saw it. A tree, stripped of its bark, gouged with deep, vicious claw marks. It looked unnatural, like something had torn it apart. The marks were too large to be from any bear, but I shrugged it off. "It's just a bear," I muttered, my heart racing as I hurried back to the cabin. That night, sleep was elusive. I kept hearing noises outside, twigs snapping, leaves rustling. Around midnight, a low growl echoed through the night, a deep, guttural sound, too menacing to be from any ordinary animal. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my father's old shotgun from under the bed, loaded it, and sat in the dark, waiting. Nothing came. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I fell into a fitful sleep with the shotgun still in my lap. The next morning, I found tracks around the cabin, massive inhuman tracks, far too large to belong to any bear. My mind raced. What the hell was out there? But I didn't dare go looking for answers. I stayed close to the cabin, barricading myself inside each night. The strange sounds grew louder, closer, more insistent. I locked every window and door, but the fear gnawed at me. On the third night, I finally shouted into the darkness, "Who's there?" My voice echoed through the trees. Silence answered, but then the scratching started, slow, deliberate. At the door, my heart pounded in my chest as I crept toward it, shotgun raised. I flung the door open, expecting to confront whatever was out there, but there was nothing. Just the deep, suffocating darkness. I decided to set traps, anything to catch whatever was stalking me. I spent hours rigging up crude makeshift traps using fishing line and old tools. That night, I sat by the fire, shotgun across my lap, waiting. The scratching returned, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, then a sharp snap. One of the traps had been triggered. I bolted outside, flashlight in one hand, shotgun in the other, my heart pounding with dread. The light fell on the trap, and my stomach turned. It was destroyed. The metal was twisted and broken as though whatever had triggered it had immense strength. This wasn't a bear. This was something else. A wave of panic washed over me. I had to leave, but it was too dark to navigate the woods safely. I was trapped. I had no choice but to wait until morning. The night felt endless. I could hear something moving outside the cabin, slow, deliberate steps, like it was circling me. I stayed frozen, barely breathing, praying for dawn. When morning finally came, I rushed to leave, but as I opened the door, I froze. A carcass, a deer lay on the porch. Its guts spilled out, its body mutilated. A warning, a message. I grabbed my backpack and the shotgun and ran toward my car. But when I reached the clearing, my heart sank. The Suburban was gone. Someone or something had taken it. Stranded in the woods, I had no choice but to return to the cabin. Night fell again. The scratching came again, but now it was louder, angrier, more insistent. I bolted the door, set up more traps, and prepared for the worst. The scratching turned into full-blown pounding. The door buckled under the force, splintering as something slammed into it from the outside. Then it exploded open. I fired the shotgun. The blast deafened me, but there, in the flickering light of the fire, it stood, hulking, massive, covered in matted fur. Its eyes burned with a predatory hunger. I fired again, but the creature was impossibly fast. It lunged at me, knocking me to the floor. The shotgun slid out of reach. Panic surged as I scrambled to my feet, grabbing a fire poker. The creature circled me, growling like a beast from hell. I swung the poker, hitting it in the side. It howled in pain but didn't retreat. With claws like knives, it slashed at me, ripping through my clothes and flesh. I could feel the hot, searing pain. In a desperate attempt, I hurled a lantern at it. The glass shattered and flames erupted. The creature recoiled in agony. I grabbed the shotgun. The blast hit it square in the chest. It stumbled back, letting out a final soul-shattering cry before collapsing into the flames. The fire spread quickly. I couldn't stay. I fled, leaving the burning wreckage behind. I ran through the woods, not stopping until I found a ranger station miles away. They didn't believe me. They thought I was delusional, isolated from the world for too long. They found the cabin burned to the ground, no trace of the creature. The police chalked it up to a bear attack. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. And though I moved far away to a small town in Arizona, I will never escape the memories. Some nights, I hear it. The same scratching, the same rustling of leaves. I tell myself it's just the wind, but deep down I know it's out there, waiting. The ridge loomed above me like a jagged monster, its dark silhouette slicing through the dying light of the afternoon. As I parked the RV at the end of the narrow, winding dirt road, I couldn't help but feel the oppressive weight of the place settle around me. The last slivers of sunlight barely pierced the dense canopy of Linville Gorge, casting everything beneath it in a sickly, blood-orange glow. I glanced at my GPS, my brow furrowing as the screen flashed. No signal. The locals called this place Devil's Ridge, and the stories I'd read were chilling enough to make anyone reconsider stepping foot here. But the darker, more twisted the place, the more I was drawn to it. As a photographer, I'd spent years chasing forgotten places and eerie legends, and my blog, Shadowed Earth, had gained a small but loyal following of those who craved the thrill of the unknown. This time, however, it wasn't just an old building or an overgrown cemetery that called to me. It was a cursed forest, a place of death and malice, if the legends were true. I slung my camera bag over my shoulder and stepped out of the RV, inhaling the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. The air was thick, unnaturally still. No bird song, no rustling leaves, only an unsettling silence. As I hiked into the woods, I found a small clearing just off the trail. It was secluded enough for me to set up camp, yet close enough to the ridge that I wouldn't miss anything. The trees surrounding me felt ancient, gnarled, as if they had stood here long before human eyes had ever seen them. I set up my camp, my fingers trembling slightly as I unpacked. The ridge above me loomed like a dark sentinel, its rocky face crumbling in places, streaked with moss and lichen. Just as I was beginning to settle in, a man emerged from the trees. His presence was unnerving, too quiet, too sudden. He was tall, his graying hair tangled and wild, his worn ranger's jacket seeming out of place against the eerie stillness of the forest. His expression was polite but wary. "You must be Harper," he said. I froze. How the hell does he know my name? I didn't tell anyone where I was going, I stammered, my heart pounding. "You called the visitor's center last week," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I'm Elliot Crane, local historian." I eyed him suspiciously. Did you come all the way out here just to greet me? He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not exactly. This place, people come, but they don't always come back. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, a vague sense of dread creeping in. What are you talking about? Elliot's gaze turned toward the ridge, his expression darkening. You don't understand. The stories are not just stories. Devil's Ridge has a way of keeping people. You should leave before nightfall. I bristled at his tone. I'm here to document this place. I'm not leaving. Elliot studied me for a long moment before sighing. If you won't leave, take this. He pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket and handed it to me. The faint scent of herbs clung to it. It's a charm to keep the witch at bay. I frowned, pocketing the charm without a word. It felt wrong. That night passed uneventfully, but an eerie sense of being watched never left me. The fire crackled, casting long, twisted shadows against the trees, but they seemed to move on their own, stretching unnaturally, flickering even though the wind had stilled. It was as if the darkness was alive, watching, waiting. The next morning, I woke with a dull ache in my wrist. When I rolled up my sleeve, I saw it, a bruise in the shape of a hand, the fingers long and thin. The air in my lungs froze as I ran my fingers over the mark. What the hell? I muttered. I tried to dismiss it. Maybe I had bumped into something. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. It nagged at me as I packed my camera and set off toward the ridge. The trail grew steeper, treacherous, and the trees began to close in around me. Their gnarled branches twisted into an impenetrable canopy, blocking out most of the light. The air grew colder with every step, the atmosphere thick with something unnatural. When I reached the old mine entrance, I froze. The ruins were far more intact than I'd expected. Stone walls stood in defiant ruins, the black, yawning shaft of the mine beckoning like a mouth ready to swallow me whole. As I raised my camera to take a photo, a faint whisper brushed my ear. My name. Harper. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was nothing. No one, just the dense, silent forest. I returned to camp, unsettled, but the real horror came when I reviewed my photos. Most were normal, sharp, clear, what I expected, but a few were not. Faces, pale and twisted, appeared in the trees, ghostly shapes where there was nothing before, distorted figures, blurred and wrong. My stomach twisted, but the worst was yet to come. The bruise on my wrist, it had darkened, deepened, the handprint more defined, more deliberate. And then Elliot appeared again, his face tight with concern. Why are you still here? He demanded, his voice harsh. I'm doing my job, I snapped, my frustration rising. What's your deal? You've been warning me, but you won't tell me why. Elliot hesitated, then spoke in a low, almost reverent tone. The witch. She was accused of poisoning a magistrate's son in the 1700s. They hung her from an oak tree near the ridge, but before she died, she cursed the land, said anyone who trespassed would bear her mark. He looked at my wrist, his eyes darkening. You've been marked. My breath caught in my throat. I took a step back. How do you know that? I've seen it before, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You need to leave, now. That night, the whispers came again, at first faint but growing louder. The wind howled around me, but the whispers didn't come from the wind. They circled my camp, murmuring in the darkness. Then it came. The voice. Not a whisper anymore, but clear, sharp. My mother's voice. Help me, Harper. My heart stopped. My mother had been dead for years. I gripped the charm Elliot had given me, clutching it as if it could shield me from the darkness. The whispers receded, but the forest was alive now, pulsing with some unseen force. And then the climax came. Determined to face whatever was haunting me, I returned to the mine. The air grew colder as I neared the shaft, and the shadows, they rippled, moved, even though the trees remained still. I stepped into the mine, and the world twisted. Suddenly, I wasn't standing in the mine anymore. I was in a clearing, surrounded by a jeering mob. At the center stood a woman, pale and defiant, a noose around her neck. As the crowd pushed her onto the gallows, she screamed, "Mark them!" she wailed. "Mark them all!" The vision shattered. I was back in the mine, but not alone. The witch stood before me, her hollow eyes burning with fury. Her skeletal hand reached for me, the same hand that had marked my wrist. I stumbled back, raising my camera as though it could protect me. The flash went off, blinding, and she recoiled, hissing like a wild animal. I ran. I didn't look back. I don't remember much of the descent from the ridge, only that I somehow made it back to my RV. But when I arrived, Elliot was gone, and so was the charm. I drove away in a daze, the mark on my wrist still burning, never fading. The photos I took from that trip, distorted faces, shadowy figures, remain the most haunting I've ever captured. One shot, in particular, stands out. The witch standing at the edge of the mine, her hand outstretched. I posted the photos on my blog, Shadowed Earth, but I've never shared the full story. Some things I've learned are better left in the shadows. I've always been an outdoorsman, though not by choice. It started when my dad dragged me out to the woods every weekend, rain or shine, whether I liked it or not. Over the years, the smell of pine and the crackle of a campfire became so ingrained in me that they felt like part of my soul, even though I wouldn't exactly call myself a nature lover. I suppose you could say I was more comfortable out there than anywhere else. But I wasn't what you'd call a survivalist, just a guy who knew how to pitch a tent and avoid poison ivy. That's why I agreed when my buddy Lyle asked if I wanted to hike up in the Washoe Mountains. I'd never been, but Lyle had a way of making anything sound like a great idea, especially when it involved escaping the grind of our office jobs. We were both sick of the same faces, the same tired jokes, the same miserable routines. We needed something different. Lyle found the perfect spot, a secluded area far from the busy trails where we could drink some beers, maybe fish, and definitely not think about work. We left early, the road rough and barely a path. My old truck groaned as it climbed the rocky hills, but Lyle kept a steady stream of chatter going. I noticed, though, how eerily quiet the woods were. Too quiet, maybe, but I didn't say anything. I chalked it up to being so far from human activity. When we finally parked, grabbed our packs, and set off into the trees, the trail was barely there, a line of trampled underbrush leading us deeper into the forest. After a couple of hours, Lyle pointed out a spot by a creek to set up camp. It was perfect, flat, just enough space between the trees for our tents, and the soothing sound of running water. By the time the sun began to dip, we had a fire going and a couple of fish frying in the pan. Lyle was already on his second beer, and I was working on my first. The stress of the office felt a million miles away, and for the first time in weeks, I actually felt I could breathe. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and we both pulled on extra layers. The firelight flickered against the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe with each gust of wind. We talked about everything and nothing. Work, women, the dumb things we did in college. Lyle was on a roll, his laughter echoing through the forest. I found myself laughing too, the sound strange but comforting in that vast, dark wilderness. But as the fire died down and the stars blazed above us, an unsettling silence took over. I was the first to call it a night. The day's hike had left me exhausted, and I crawled into my tent, leaving the flap open to let in the cool night air. I must have dozed off quickly, but then I woke to a sound, a soft, rhythmic thumping, faint but unmistakable. It was enough to send a shiver down my spine. I lay in the darkness, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. Lyle snored like a chainsaw next door, so I knew it wasn't him. The sound stopped. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the wind or some animal. I closed my eyes, trying to will myself back to sleep. But then it came again, closer this time. Thump, thump, thump. My heart raced. I sat up, flashlight in hand, Vito, trying to steady my breath as I fumbled with the switch. When the light finally flickered on, I pointed it towards the source of the noise, just beyond the dying embers of our campfire. There was nothing, just trees and shadows. I hissed Lyle's name, but he didn't stir. I didn't want to shout, not if it was nothing, but the sound returned, closer than before. Thump, thump. I grabbed the flashlight and stumbled out of my tent, scanning the darkness with trembling hands. The campsite looked normal, just the fire, the creek, the tents, nothing out of place. But then I saw it, a shadow low to the ground, darting between the trees. It moved too quickly, almost too fast for my eyes to follow. I froze. The flashlight shook in my hand. It was big, bigger than any animal I'd ever seen. It moved unnaturally, like it didn't belong in the woods, like it didn't belong anywhere. My pulse thundered in my ears as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. "Lyle!" I shouted this time, my voice cracking with panic. Lyle groaned from his tent, clearly annoyed, but he didn't understand. He never would. I kept the light trained on where I had seen the shadow, but now, nothing. Silence. What the hell, man? Lyle stumbled out of his tent, bleary-eyed. Where? He asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. I pointed towards the trees. His flashlight swept across the space, but there was nothing. No sign of movement, just trees and stillness. You sure it wasn't a deer or something? Lyle asked, clearly still half asleep. No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a deer. Lyle sighed, that all too familiar sigh, the one that said I was overreacting. Let's check it out. I wanted to tell him no, to stay by the fire and wait until morning, but something inside me snapped. I couldn't let him go alone. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things or if this was real, but I had to know. We moved together, slowly, flashlights cutting through the trees, the air unnaturally still. The thumping had stopped, but the woods felt wrong, too quiet, too watchful. My skin prickled as though unseen eyes were upon us, following our every movement. We circled the camp, but there was no sign of any creature. No tracks, no broken branches, just trees standing silent, indifferent. See? Lyle said, trying to sound reassuring, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice. Probably just a raccoon or something. I nodded, but I didn't believe him. It wasn't a raccoon, it was something else, something that didn't belong. We headed back to the fire, but the unease still gnawed at me. I sat there, staring into the flames, listening, waiting. An hour passed, maybe longer, and just when I thought I could relax, I heard it again. Thump, thump, thump. Closer, more insistent. I shot to my feet, heart hammering in my chest. I grabbed my flashlight, trying to steady my hands. Lyle was still fast asleep in his tent. I wasn't sure he'd believe me if I woke him. I stood alone in the darkness, my flashlight trembling in the night air, and that's when I saw it. From the direction of the creek, a massive shape moved toward me. Its body was hunched, grotesque, twisted, like it was pulling itself forward, dragging limbs that didn't fit. The air around it seemed to warp with its presence, right, as if the forest itself recoiled from the thing. I couldn't make out its face, but I saw its mouth, a cavernous, wide, gaping maw filled with rows of jagged teeth, sharp and uneven like broken glass. It moved toward me with slow deliberation, its twisted limbs jerking unnaturally as if they could barely hold the weight of its body. And I knew, without a doubt, that it was coming for me. Slowly, steadily. It knew I was too scared to run, and it wasn't in any hurry. I couldn't move. My legs were frozen in place. My breath was ragged, shallow. Lyle! I screamed, my voice breaking with terror. Lyle bolted out of his tent, panic in his eyes, but he didn't need to ask what was going on. The flashlight caught the creature's twisted form, and I heard him gasp, his bravado from earlier completely gone. The thing was almost upon us. Lyle didn't hesitate. His survival instincts kicked in, and he bolted, screaming for me to follow. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot as that creature's clawed hand reached out inches from my face. The thick stench of its breath hit me, wet and rancid. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I found my legs. I turned and ran, not caring where I was going, just needing to escape. I heard it behind me, its heavy footfalls thudding against the earth, growing closer with every step. I ran, harder, faster, the forest blurring around me. Branches scraped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me. I didn't know how long I ran, didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I had to keep moving. I had to get away. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the thumping stopped. I kept running, too terrified to look back. When I finally burst out of the trees and into a clearing, I collapsed in the middle, gasping for breath, my legs screaming in pain. I dared to look behind me. There was nothing. No creature. No sign of Lyle. Just silence. I waited, every muscle tensed. The forest felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a move. But the only sound was my ragged breathing. I didn't know how long I stayed there, crouched in the clearing, too terrified to move. It felt like hours, but it could have been minutes. Eventually, the terror subsided enough for me to think. And when I did, I realized I had no idea where I was. The camp was gone. The only thing left was the crushing, suffocating silence of the forest. I was lost. Lyle was gone. I didn't know if he made it out. I didn't want to know. All I wanted was to leave that cursed place behind. And so I walked, my legs shaking, trying to find a road, a trail, anything to lead me back to civilization. It felt like hours before I stumbled upon a narrow dirt track. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I didn't care where it led. It was away from the woods. They found Lyle's gear, his tent, his pack, but there was no sign of him. The cops said it was probably a bear attack, that he'd run off in the wrong direction, gotten lost. They didn't believe me when I told them about the creature. Who would? I left Arkansas and never went back. Sometimes late at night I think about that thing in the woods, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting. But I don't lose sleep over it. What's done is done. My name is Thaddeus Enoch. Folks around here call me Thad. I've been a cop in Harbin for 15 years, and for most of that time, nothing ever really happened. Petty crimes, bar brawls, the occasional domestic dispute, nothing out of the ordinary. Life was predictable, quiet. But last summer, things changed. They changed in a way none of us could have ever imagined. I'm going to tell you what happened, just like I'd tell a friend over a beer. A story that still haunts me. I moved to Harbin right after high school, a small, sleepy town tucked away in the mountains of Oregon. The kind of place where everyone knows your name and your business. I joined the police force because, well, my old man was a cop, and his old man before him. It was in my blood. I liked the simplicity of it, the order. That was until the day we found the first body. It was my usual morning patrol, joking with my partner, Leon Benson. Leon's a mountain of a man, built like a linebacker, but with the gentlest heart. We'd been partners for 5 years, and he was the brother I never had. We were driving along Route 12 when the call came in. A hiker had found a body near Bear Creek. "Dad, you ever get the feeling something bad's coming?" Leon asked, his brow furrowed as we sped towards the scene. I tried to lighten the mood, but a knot tightened in my stomach. "Leon, I think you've been watching too many horror flicks." But deep down, something told me this was different. When we arrived, we found the hiker, a young woman named Marissa, pale and shaking. She led us up a narrow, winding trail to where she'd found the body. The smell hit us first, a sickly sweet, rotting stench that made my stomach churn. The body was a man, mid-30s, but he was torn apart. Not by an animal, though. This was different. It was disturbingly methodical. I exchanged a glance with Leon. This was no wild animal attack. We weren't equipped for this. We called in the state police and waited for the coroner. Dr. Lydia Holtz arrived with her usual no-nonsense demeanor. She confirmed what we feared. This was no animal. This was murder. But there was something more, something darker. The wounds, they weren't just random. They were deliberate, as if the killer was following some twisted design. For the next few days, the town was on edge. Everyone was talking about it, but no one had answers. Leon and I doubled our patrols, but nothing seemed out of place. Then another body turned up. This time it was Mrs. Roscoe, the elderly woman who ran the flower shop. She'd been missing for a day, and when we found her, I wish I could forget it. The same mutilation, the same brutality. It was like staring into the abyss. "Thad, this ain't right. This is evil," Leon whispered when we found her. I didn't have words. We were both scared, but we had a job to do. The state police took over the investigation, but they didn't get much further than we had. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no leads, just bodies, torn apart like grotesque puzzles. The media descended on Harbin, and our quiet town became a circus. And that's when the disappearances started. First, a young couple vanished near Bear Creek. Then a teenage boy, last seen riding his bike home from school. The town fell into a panic. People started locking their doors and windows, like afraid to go out after dark. One night, Leon and I were on patrol when we saw someone dart through the alley behind the diner. We gave chase, but he was fast, too fast. We lost him in the maze of back streets, but we found something else. Another body. This time, it was Leon who found the clue. A scrap of fabric caught on a fence, stained with blood. "We gotta find this guy. He's not going to stop," Leon said, his voice grim. "We will, Leon. We have to," I replied, but I wasn't so sure anymore. The next few weeks were a blur. More bodies, more disappearances, and the town's fear building with every passing day. I couldn't sleep at night, always thinking about the killer, always wondering if he was out there, watching us. And then, one evening, I got a call from Dr. Holtz. "Thad? Leon? You need to see this." We met her at the lab, and her face was as serious as I'd ever seen it. "I've been going over the bodies again," she said, her voice steady but strained. "There's a pattern to the injuries. It's not random. It's like the killer is following some kind of ritual. Ritual? Leon raised an eyebrow. Yes, and it's escalating. The killings are getting bolder, more violent, she explained, showing us the gruesome details. The killer was no longer content with simply killing. He was evolving, and it was horrifying. That night, I couldn't shake the thought that we were facing something ancient, that something far beyond anything we'd ever imagined. The next morning, Leon called me. Thad, we need to talk. Meet me at the station. When I arrived, Leon was more serious than I'd ever seen him. I've been doing some digging. I think I know who the killer is. I stared at him, incredulous. What? How? Remember that guy we chased in the alley? His name's Sam. He used to work at the flower shop. I found his record. Nothing major, but he's been in and out of trouble for years. I think he's our guy. We decided to pay Sam a visit. His house was a rundown shack on the outskirts of town. We knocked, but no answer. We kicked the door in, and then I saw it, the basement. A collection of trophies, bones, pieces of clothing, things that didn't belong, things that should have never been touched. We got him, I said, my voice shaking, a mix of relief and revulsion. Yeah, but where is he now? Leon asked, his eyes scanning the room, unsettled. As if on cue, we heard a noise upstairs. We rushed up, guns drawn, and found him standing in the doorway, a sick, twisted smile on his face. Sam, it's over. Put your hands up, I ordered, trying to sound confident, but the fear was clawing at me. He didn't move. Instead, he lunged at us, a knife in his hand. Leon fired first, and Sam crumpled to the floor, dead. The nightmare was over, or so I thought. The aftermath was a blur, media chaos, endless police reports. The town tried to return to normal, but nothing would ever be the same. We'd lost too many good people. Leon and I were hailed as heroes, but it didn't feel that way. We'd done our jobs, but at what cost? A few weeks later, Leon and I sat on the porch of the local bar, sharing a beer. Thad, you ever think about leaving this place? He asked, staring out at the sunset. Sometimes, I admitted. But then I think about all the good folks here, and I know I can't leave them. This is my home. Yeah, me too, Leon said, his smile sad and tired. Life in Harbin went on, but the scars of that summer would never fade. The faces of the victims still haunt me. Their voices echo in my mind. But I also remember the strength of the community, how we came together in the face of unspeakable evil. And as long as I'm here, I'll do everything in my power to keep them safe. That's my story. The one I tell when people ask about the Summer of Fear. It's not a tale of heroism or glory. It's the story of ordinary people facing extraordinary horrors. It's a story of loss, survival, and something far darker than we could ever have imagined. A story I'll never forget. I've always been the kind of guy who refuses to back down from a challenge. Maybe that's why on a cold and desolate October evening, I found myself parked deep in the heart of the Acadia National Forest. Just me, my beaten-up RV, a cooler of beer, and a couple of fishing rods. I needed a reset, an escape from the wreckage of my life. The divorce wasn't just ugly, it hollowed me out. She took everything, my house, my stability, and worst of all, my peace of mind. The forest was supposed to be my sanctuary, my refuge. Just me, the pines, and the distant murmur of the river. By the time I parked the RV by the riverbank, the sun had bled away, leaving the forest in a dim, gray twilight. I cracked open a beer, inhaling the sharp, cold air as I set up a fire pit. For a moment, the world felt still, like I could breathe again. Then my phone buzzed, tearing the fragile peace. A text from Rick, the only friend who'd stuck around after the mess. Don't get lost out there, man. You hear about the guy who went missing last month? I scoffed and tossed the phone aside. Missing hikers? Sure. It was a big forest, and people did stupid things. But it didn't mean anything. I wasn't going to let fear ruin this. The fire crackled, spitting sparks into the darkening air. The shadows grew long and twisted, stretching like dark fingers across the forest. I was just starting to lose myself in the rhythm of the flames when I heard it, a soft crunch, leaves shifting behind me. Probably a deer. But when I turned, my breath caught. A shape stood at the edge of the tree line, too tall, too still. My stomach twisted, a cold knot forming in my gut. It wasn't a deer. Deer don't stand up like that. Hey, I called out, my voice unnaturally loud in the thickening quiet. Maybe it was a camper, a ranger, but the shape didn't move. It just stood there, watching. I grabbed my flashlight, my hand shaking. The beam barely reached the figure before it darted out of view. So fast, too fast. My heart hammered in my chest. I told myself it was nothing. The forest played tricks, the light, the shadows, it could all twist your mind. But something gnawed at me, a cold sensation creeping up my spine. It wasn't the way it moved, it was the way it watched. It was deliberate, calculating. I shut the RV door behind me, locked it, and made sure the revolver was within reach. I've been alone out here before. This was nothing. Then the knocking started, soft, tapping, almost deliberate. Every fiber of my being screamed to stay inside, to ignore it, but stubbornness, maybe stupidity, drove me to fling the door open. I stepped out into the suffocating blackness of the forest. The silence was unnatural. The wind moaned through the trees, but the usual night sounds, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of crickets, were gone. My flashlight beam felt weak, like the night itself was swallowing the light. Then a snap, a crack of a branch breaking, too close, too deliberate. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. That's when I saw it. At first it was a blur, a shape at the edge of my light. A wolf, maybe? But no, the thing that stepped into the clearing was wrong. Its body was twisted, grotesque, a nightmare on two legs, long limbs, gaunt and trembling, barely held together by patches of matted fur. Its face, a hideous blend of man and beast, was crowned by eyes that gleamed with a sickly glowing yellow. My hand froze around the revolver. I raised it. I fired. Once, twice, 3 times. The thing didn't flinch. It didn't move. Not an inch. Before I could pull the trigger again, it lunged. One moment it was yards away, the next it was on me, slamming into me with an inhuman force that knocked the breath from my lungs. The impact sent my gun skittering across the ground. Then the smell hit me. Rotting fur, something decaying, something dead. Its claws raked across my arm, tearing through muscle and bone like butter. I screamed, my vision blurring, my body thrashing beneath its weight. But it was too strong, too fast. For a split second, I thought it was over. This was it. The forest would swallow me whole, and no one would ever know. I'd die alone, torn apart in this godforsaken place. Then it stopped. It cocked its head like it was listening to something I couldn't hear. Its glowing eyes fixed on me one last time before it let out a guttural snarl, low, rasping, like it was speaking a language I didn't understand. Then it was gone, disappearing into the trees faster than anything should move. I lay there, trembling, blood pooling beneath me. I could feel the weight of the forest pressing in, its cold breath suffocating me. When I finally staggered back to my feet, I limped into the RV, slammed the door, and piled everything I could find against it. I didn't sleep. Dawn came, but it wasn't the relief I expected. The forest was too quiet, too calm. I stumbled outside, clutching my bleeding arm, expecting to see something, any sign of what happened. But there was nothing. No claw marks, no blood, no trace of the creature. Just my own bloody footprints leading back to the RV. I thought I was safe. I thought I had made it out. Then I saw it. A deer, or what was left of one. Its mangled body lay splayed across the dirt road, torn apart in a way that no natural predator could manage. Its ribs snapped like twigs. Its entrails spilled out in grotesque ribbons. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I drove to the nearest town, not caring if anyone believed me. I told the rangers everything, every detail of what happened, and I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They didn't believe me, but they had to know. Something is out there, and I'll never go back. Never.